All right. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. My name is Donny Budinsky, and I am your host and moderator for tonight's much anticipated debate between Dr. Kent Hovind and Dr. Chris Thompson. Now, for this debate, we are specifically focusing on the Order Carnivora and engaging the question: did the extant carnivores, the Order Carnivora, descend from a single common ancestor? Dr. Chris Thompson says yes, and therefore takes the affirmative. Dr. Dino says no, and therefore takes the negative. And I got to say, I'm excited for this one. I'm looking forward to this debate, as I know many of you in the audience are as well. And I can predict these gentlemen here will not let you down in terms of, I think, a good exchange, a thought-provoking exchange. Now, what I'd like to do before we get into the debate, opening statements, and our guests tonight start to bring the heat on the topic, is get acquainted. Let's break the ice a little bit. It's always great. It's always awesome to have fresh faces, new debaters on the Standing for Truth debate platform. And that would be Dr. Chris Thompson. You're certainly no stranger to debates. You are an experienced debater, but this is your first time here. And so firstly, thanks for being here.
Hey,
secondly,
thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Chris.
Sure. So appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I'm Chris Thompson. I'm a professor of neuroscience at Virginia Tech. I on YouTube, I have a channel called Dr. Chris Thompson, where I have a bunch of neuroscience lectures and videos. But as you said, I also do debates. I debate on creation and evolution. I did a recent debate on fluoride and fluoridation in drinking water. That was on Modern Day Debates. And I have a lot of science-based content and skeptical content on there as well. So I dabble in and out. Of course, I'm a professor, so I'm busy with that too. And but I do what I can to do science communication stuff as well.
Awesome. With all that going on for both you and Kent, who needs sleep, right? There's too much to do, too much to study. Too many events to participate in. So, Chris, I appreciate that. For those who like what they're hearing, and if they want to hear more from you, they can check your YouTube channel. I do have it linked here. And I've seen many of your debates. I've seen a lot of your content, and I appreciate your approach to engaging these issues as you engage them in a professional manner. So I appreciate that. Okay, Dr. Dino, great to have you back, brother. Certainly not your first time here, nor is it your first debate. Chris, looks like you are debate number 381. And so, okay, this is going to be good. Kent, tell us, how have you been? How's everything at Dinosaur Adventureland? And just a little bit about yourself overall.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be back here, Donnie. Yeah, my name's Kent Hovind. I've been a Baptist preacher 50 years, 51 coming up in a few months. I got a birthday coming up in a couple of days, going to be 72 years old. I taught high school science and math for 15 years. I believe the Bible is literally true and scientifically accurate. The Bible says that plants and animals will always bring forth after their kind. It says it 20 times in the first 7 chapters. If anybody thinks that the kinds of animals have a common ancestor that's not the same kind, they're dreaming. That's not science. It's imagination. SpongeBob. And you're welcome to believe that. But evolution, I've often said, is the dumbest and most dangerous religious cult in the history of the world. Never been a dumber or more dangerous idea than to teach the kids we're all related to a sponge and we came from a rock, which came from nothing, for no reason. I think that's dangerous and dumb and not scientific. Okay.
Fighting words already, Ken. I can tell this is going to be a good debate to remember. So appreciate that introduction. Thank you as well for your time. And as was with Chris, for those that want to see more from you, Kent, if they like what they're hearing, they want to see more of your content, I do have your couple of YouTube channels down there linked for people to check out. And you're also on Rumble. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much for the introductions and helping us to break the ice and get acquainted for tonight. And so let's go over the format. We are going to be having largely an informal exchange. We will be kicking off with 10-minute opening statements to help us set the foundation for tonight's debate. People in the audience might be wondering, what is the Order Carnivora? What are we really dealing with here? And so this will help us for 10 minutes each, that's 20 minutes, to just lay the foundation for what we're going to discuss in a discussion period, about 45 minutes roughly after our opening statements. Then we'll give our guests, Chris and Kent, roughly 5 minutes each for closing statements, help them wrap up their thoughts, wrap up their points. And then this is where we get you guys in the audience involved. We'll have a roughly 25-ish minute Q&A. So please, if you got a question for Dr. Thompson, a question for Dr. Hovind, let me know who the question's for and tag me either at Donny or at Standing For Truth. Okay, Chris, we're going to get right into our first opening statement. And if you have to go a little over 10 minutes, no problem. Whatever you take, we'll just have Kent take the same amount of time.
Yeah, sounds good, especially because of this, because like we're talking about specific stuff. And
that's right.
You know, as you said, like there's a lot of details here that it'd be helpful to get the audience acquainted with it. So, all right, let me get my screen up here. Okay, great. So
you're good to go, Chris.
Good to go. Great. Yeah. As I said, I'm an assistant professor of neuroscience at Virginia Tech. But I do have an undergraduate degree from the University of Illinois in ecology, ethology, and evolution. That doesn't make me an expert in evolutionary biology. I know more than the average Joe, but I'm not an evolutionary biologist. In fact, most evolutionary biologists think that it's a waste of time to discuss with creationists and argue with creationists. I actually don't necessarily disagree with them, but I think that it's fun. So that's why I'm here. So I study how hormones shape the development and plasticity of neural circuits in a wide range of species, which of course that's one reason why I need to be paying attention to evolution, just like every other biologist on the face of the planet. And the views that I express tonight are just my own. Now, one of those views is that this issue really isn't about science, right? The debate over creation and evolution, it touches on scientific topics. I'm obviously going to be talking a lot about science, but this isn't really about science. This is a theological debate between a worldview that requires the literal interpretation of the Bible and a worldview that doesn't. The majority of people all over the world do not start with the first principle that every single word in the Bible must be 100% factual and true. And even Kent doesn't. He said he does, but I'm sure he doesn't because he doesn't believe in a flat earth. And in fact, many religious people see the Bible as allegory and metaphorical, the ends of the earth, assuming that that's a metaphor. Most accept that evolution is an accurate working model of the history of life on Earth, and that's because that's based on the preponderance of evidence. Now, that preponderance of evidence clearly shows that the carnivores evolved. So what I'm talking about today is that the group of animals that we see here, these different groups, all are carnivores, and that they all evolved from a single common ancestor over millions of years. This is based on a number of lines of evidence, and I'm going to briefly go over those for the introduction. We'll get more into the specifics during the open discussion. So some of this is based on comparative morphology, for instance. So if we get into comparative morphology, we have to talk about taxonomy. This is how we organize life. So I'm showing here a picture of a red fox. Okay, this is a carnivore. It is an animal. It is not a plant or fungus. Because it's an animal, it goes into the kingdom Animalia. So this is how we start our categorization. And then we can get more and more specific based on morphological features and genetic signatures. So the red fox also has a backbone. That means it's a vertebrate, which puts it into the phylum Chordata. It's not an invertebrate like the insects. So therefore, it's more similar to the chordates than it is to the invertebrates. Then within the chordates, we have different classes. So some of those classes are amphibia and birds, fish, but we also have the mammals. The red fox has fur. It gives birth to live young. It produces milk. Those are the things that make it a mammal, just like humans and elephants. Therefore, it's within the class Mammalia. And then we get into more specific types. The orders of carnivores are exactly where we find the red fox, which has specific morphological features that make it unique to carnivores and not the other mammalian groups. And then within the order carnivore, we have different families. Now, the red fox is within the Canidae, which is the dogs, the foxes, and the wolves. And it's not like the other families that are within carnivore. And of course, you can get more and more specific down to species. So let's talk about carnivores. What are carnivores? Carnivores are defined by specific morphological features. And that's one way that we identify them. Okay. So they have carnassials for slicing, which are specific forms of teeth. It's specifically the premolar on the top and the molar on the bottom. They have evolved to have this shearing sort of formation that allows for the slicing of meat. So they have a very specific sort of heterodont formation of teeth, and including these very sharp canines. You don't find that in the other mammalian groups. They, of course, the reason why they have teeth for slicing is because they are largely carnivorous. They eat meat, whereas the other groups of mammals don't. They're largely herbivorous or insectivorous. We find almost all of the carnivores eat meat. They have specific kinds of claws that are very unique to carnivores, and we don't see them in the other mammals. The other thing that's unique to carnivores is that they have a very unique kind of auditory bullae. So what that is that if you turn over the skull of a mammal, you can see the auditory chambers. And the auditory bullae in carnivores are very unique in that they are complex and enlarged. And in the other groups of mammals, they are very simple. There are other differences, but those are the major morphological differences. So within carnivores, there are 16 families, okay? And that's what we're looking at here. All the groups that I'm showing here are carnivores. We all agree that they're carnivores. We put them in the group carnivores, but they fall into these 16 different families with different numbers of species in each family, right? So, but the thing is, these families are not just like a random grab bag of unrelated groups. They fall into two major categories themselves. In red are the caniforms, which are the dog-like carnivores, and in blue is the feliforms, which are the cat-like carnivores. So we have these two major groups, which indicates that there was an early split that happened in the course of evolution that meant that there now is descent and modification within these two separate phylogenies. So let's talk about feliforms and caniforms. So morphologically, they are also different as well. They're all carnivores. They all have those same features, but they also have additional things that make them unique as well. So feliforms, they have a bunch of things that make them unique. One of those is the fact that they have a double-chambered auditory bulla, whereas caniforms have single-chambered auditory bullae. So that's one big difference. You can always tell if you're looking at a caniform carnivore, a dog-like carnivore, by looking to see if it has a single-chambered auditory bulla, or if it's a feliform, it will be double-chambered. That is one thing that's unique. There are other things that are unique within the feliforms relative to the caniforms as well. So that's one line of evidence, is the comparative morphology. Clearly, that all these animals are descended from a common ancestor because they have common morphological features. Now, other reasons why we know carnivores evolved come from fossil evidence. For the introduction, I just don't have enough time to talk about the fossil evidence. I'm just going to highlight one thing that we do know is that when you look at the fossil record, if you look at the fossils that date between 65 million years ago and about 40 million years ago, so after the extinction of the major dinosaur groups, you find that there's this rapid diversification of the different mammalian groups during that time as well. There were a lot of mammals that evolved during that time to also eat and process meat, but there weren't any like true carnivores during that time. They were actually quite varied. There were things that looked pretty similar to the carnivores, but they didn't have those specific morphological features. We don't find the direct ancestor for all the carnivores quite yet until we get to about 42 million years ago. So it's likely that they evolved from the pre-carnivore-like mammals. That specific relationship is difficult to parse out, obviously, but we find the actual first carnivore for sure is at 42 million years ago. So between 42 million years old and till today, we see all kinds of different fossil carnivores that fall into the feliforms or into the caniforms that are transitional in form. I don't have time to talk about it in the introduction, but that's where we're at. Now, the other thing that we can look at is just basic biogeography. That is, where are animals located on Earth? Now, if you look at the overall global distribution of the caniforms, the dog-like carnivores, we find that most of the variety that we find of the caniforms is largely found in the Americas. But if we look at the feliforms, we actually see almost all of that biodiversity. All those different species and families are largely located in just Africa, Europe, and in Asia, okay? And the reason why is because, as I said, there are these two distinct groups, the feliforms and the caniforms. They split and evolved very differently and quite early on. And most of the evolution of the caniforms happened in the Americas, where they diversified and spread, whereas the feliforms evolved and diversified within Africa, Asia, and Europe. And to the point where if you look at dog-like carnivore families, such as the procyonids or the Mephidae, those almost all of those species are found just in the Americas, And if you look at other feliforms, you don't find any of them in the Americas at all. They're only in Africa, Europe, and Asia. So if you're talking about hyenas or mongooses or vervets or civets, all of those are just found in Africa and Asia and in Europe, and you don't find any of them in North America. And that's because there was this split that occurred where the caniforms evolved in the Americas and the feliforms evolved in Europe, Asia, and Africa. Of course, there's genetic evidence as well. So we can look at, I plan on going on to this in more detail with Kent. We can look at molecular clocks that show a consistent pattern of relationships within the carnivorans. Whether you look at mitochondrial DNA, so this is the phylogenetic tree from this study here, or if you look at nuclear DNA, looking at this phylogenetic tree, they see the same exact thing. One is that all of the carnivores are more genetically similar to each other than they are to other mammalian groups. Two, that within the carnivores, we see this two major groups. We see that the feliforms have more genetic similarities to each other than they do to the caniforms or the dog-like carnivores, and that all the dog-like carnivores have more genetic similarities to themselves than they do to the feliforms or the cat-like carnivores. And then within each of those groups, we see further phylogenetic breakdowns that follows exactly along from the fossil evidence and the morphological evidence. So it's all perfectly consistent with the fact that carnivores have a single common ancestor. Now, what do young Earth creationists believe? Well, they believe that God created the ancestors to the carnivores about 6,500 years ago, and that around 4,500 years ago, God demanded that Noah take one male and one female of each kind of carnivore onto the ark, and that all the rest of them were killed in a global flood. So Noah had one male and one female raccoon kind, and one male and female wolf kind, one male and female cat kind. But what we see, many different species of these different kinds today. So what that means is that all of the biodiversity that we see, even within kind, means that all of these species must have evolved via natural selection and other evolutionary mechanisms, but within the last 4,500 years. And actually, it's much shorter than that. And none of that is consistent with what we know about how evolutionary biology or biology in general works. So it just doesn't work. Now, what I'm not arguing is I'm not arguing for the universal common ancestry of the tree of life. I'm not arguing that humans and apes share some sort of common ancestor. I'm arguing something very specific. I'm arguing that the carnivores share a common ancestor and that there's evolution that has occurred within carnivores. So if Kent wants to go on and talk about how I'm related to a whale or a pine tree or a mosquito or a tomato, I'm going to have to redirect him to talk about carnivores. We're talking specifically about carnivore evolution within kinds and outside of kinds. And so we need to be discussing these things. And in fact, I'm not even arguing that carnivores are necessarily related to other mammalian groups, such as the pangolins or the humans, or related to birds or anything like that. My argument could be perfectly consistent with the idea that the carnivores were somehow designed by, say, an alien race that brought some sort of proto-carnivore down to Earth and deposited them on Earth 60 million years ago, and that all of the evolution that we've seen since then, through the mechanisms of evolution, common descent, and modification, has resulted in this major group called carnivores that are clearly descended from a single common ancestor. And we're going to talk about that. And so that's where I'm going to leave this off. Thanks for listening. And I hope to get more into the details in just a moment.
Thank you, Chris, for that opening statement. I appreciate the slides and also the work you put into the presentation. Help clarify a lot of things. And as I said, help us set the foundation for the debate tonight on the Oder Carnivora. Kent, I will reset the timer and you have 13 minutes for an opening statement. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, brother. Is my audio okay there, Neil? Yes, sir. Okay. I think we have a misunderstanding of what science is. He gave a lot of things today already that really fall way outside the field of science. We don't observe any of these, okay? Science, knowledge gained from using observations and experiments to explain the world around us. Nobody's ever seen a cat produce a non-cat or a cat and a dog have a common ancestor. We don't see these things. It's not science. It's his religious belief, and he's welcome to it. But what he shared tonight was obviously a religion, including the The idea that we see 65 million years ago this changing, you can't see back in time at all. You can't see the past. And that's all based on the geologic column, which does not exist anywhere. So science means knowledge. That's what the word means. We know cats produce cats. We know dogs produce dogs. We can see that. We've never seen anything other than that. Now, if you wish to believe that they're related to a common ancestor, well, you believe whatever you want, but quit calling it science. Science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions. I predict cats will always produce cats and dogs will always produce dogs. I predict they always have if we could go back in time, but we can't, okay? The Bible says they will bring forth after their kind. That is quoted 20 times in the first 7 chapters of Genesis. I believe that's true. What he's sharing with you tonight will certainly make you doubt the Bible, which I think is unwise when it stands before God, but that's a different story. But what he shared tonight is not observable science. It's a religious belief. This textbook says, religions attempt to understand and explain the world, but religion is not considered science. I agree. And evolution is a religion. What he shared tonight was what he believes in. He believes they had a common ancestor based on whatever, whatever thing. Here's many problems I'd like to cover. I'm going to go through his whole slide presentation myself and let me give it. This geologic column that he alluded to here about X number of million years ago, finding fossils. First of all, Dr. Chris, there is no such thing as a fossil record. There are fossils by the billions, trillions, quadrillions, but they're not a record. None of them talk. None of them have a date on them. We are putting our interpretation on that fossil. If you took this fossil clam, for instance, where'd it go here? I got one here somewhere. If you take a fossil to anybody and say, how old is it? First question they ask is, where did you find it? What difference would that make? Where did I find it? Here it is over here. Petrified clam in the closed position. I got a bunch of them around here in our museum at Dinosaur Adventureland. It doesn't talk. It doesn't have a date on it. You put your interpretation on it. This geologic column does not exist anywhere in the world except the textbooks. And I keep asking them, you guys are claiming the top layer is younger. Where did it come from? Are they coming from outer space? If I flip this sand toy over and it makes 20 or 30 different layers, are the layers different ages? Moving it from here to here does not change the age. Every speck of dirt on the planet is the same age, whether 6,000 or 6 trillion, they're all the same age. Is dirt being added from outer space? There is no geologic column, and that's the Bible you guys stand on. You believe there was a Cenozoic era and a Mesozoic and Paleozoic and Archaeozoic and all that, Jurassic, Triassic, Mississippi, and I'm very familiar with what you believe, but it doesn't exist anywhere. So I think you're building on a really silly foundation to do that. Also, there is no fossil record. There are fossils by the zillions, no question. I've got a huge museum here full of all kinds of fossils. But if you find a fossil in the ground, all you really could prove is it died and was buried rapidly. You cannot prove it had any offspring. You can't prove a fossil you found in the dirt was the offspring of carnivores and feliforms. You can't prove that. You can believe that is all you can believe. You can't prove it had offspring that lived. You can't prove it had offspring that were different from itself. It's simply not provable. It's a religious belief, and you're welcome to it. But don't call it science, and don't charge all the taxpayers to teach that to the next group of kids coming through. Why should we believe that a bone in the dirt can do something no animal today can do? Change to a different kind. But you believe by faith in these family trees that the animals changed over to something else. You want to just talk about the carnivores? Okay, I think drawing lines on paper between these is not evidence that they evolved. It's just a propaganda poster to brainwash people. You said you believe that the cats and the dogs have a common ancestor, and the raccoons and all the different carnivores have a common ancestor. Nobody's ever seen a raccoon produce a non-raccoon or come from something that was not a raccoon. It isn't science. That's all I'd like to object to. So I forgot to start my timer, Donnie, so give me a countdown when I get too far. This whole taxonomy thing of classifying them into kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, the animals don't know we're doing that, and they don't care that we do that to them. They've decided to put them in different categories and say, these we're going to call carnivores. Okay, they eat meat. Okay. They have some similarities. You shared quite a few differences also. But then you went on to say, couldn't write fast enough, the fox is not like others in their order. But yet you believe they've got a common ancestor. Just because they have some similarities doesn't mean they have a common ancestor. Could it possibly be they have a common designer, and that's a design that works? Lots of the cars I see on the highway have round tires. That's because that's a good design that works over square ones or triangle ones, okay? Could it be, if you ever considered, that even maybe the similarities they have are because of a designer designing them based on a common theme? They need to do the same thing. They need to smell their prey, so he gave them olfactory nerves. Okay, maybe they need to see their prey, so he gave them eyes. So maybe they need to eat meat, and so he gave them teeth, capable of slicing the meat. That could be a design feature, but you've already got it settled in your head. It has to be an evolution feature. So you decide to put them in order. The study, to make these charts that they show here, using germline mutation rates, assumes that because we share genetic similarity, we must require divergence from common ancestors. Stop. If this was a court of law, a freshman law student would tear that one apart and say, excuse me, they probably have a common designer. You don't know it's a common ancestor, but you guys have already excluded the obvious, that God made the world, and relieved in the ridiculous that they have a common ancestor. We don't observe this. None of these, let's see, what do they have here on this chart? They have, let's see, the seals, the dog-like animals, the bats, I guess they got some carnivorous bats, going back to, they drew lines on paper connecting them. Well, you can draw all the lines you want. That's artwork. It's not science, okay? And it's not based on science. We never see a dog produce a non-dog, ever. They use the fossil record to support this by saying there's an effective mutation rate. Combined with the substitution rate aligns with the phylogeny of the fossil record. There is no fossil record. Give it up. Come on. Effective mutation rate. You don't know when a mutation is going to happen. There's no such thing as an effective mutation rate. The frequency with which gene changes from a wild type to a specific mutant, generally expressed as the number of mutations per biological unit, as mutations per cell division. You guys are counting on mistakes, mutations, bad things happening, creating something new and making an improvement. It's not observable. We don't see mutations produce anything useful. Mutations are harmful, fatal, or useless. You would take quadrillions of mutations to change from one type of animal into a totally different type. And your charts that you show have everything going back to a protozoa, and a protozoa turned into everything we see today. This is not science. This is a propaganda poster, is all it is. And we don't observe mutations that are helpful, that add new information. There just aren't any. And yet you would need quadrillions of them. The rate can vary significantly depending on organism and environmental conditions. Mutation rates are not constant and can be influenced by various factors. Let's see, it can be exceed the basal rate by more than 1 million-fold. Mutations are not predictable. Mutations are not reliable to change something to something else. I think it's sad. It's ironic they do not get a substitution rate that matched the mutation rate at all from the pedigree studies. They created their own substitution rate based on something called phylogenetic regression. All they did was line up mutation rates to show how fast the rate of change occurs in a species. This is talking about that chart that you used, okay? And then they go to the fossil record and create their own substitution rates. It's all imagination, Chris. I'm sorry. You drank the Kool-Aid, okay? Phylogenetic regression is mathematically equivalent to generalized least squares, which take into account that, I don't want to go through all the technical stuff here, okay? There was no observed rate of substitution change observed in any germline study. The rate came solely based on fossils, which means it is circular reasoning. I agree. You guys date the fossils by the rocks they're in, and you date the rock layers by the fossils they contain. How can you not see that circular reasoning? There is no geologic column. All those layers of the earth formed in Noah's flood. Each tide would make a new layer. If the earth were covered in water, like we believe it was during the flood, the Bible said the scoffers will be ignorant of that flood. But the moon is up there pulling on our water right now, making a bump called the high tide while we turn. And we on earth get to see high tide, low tide, high tide, low tide, about every 6 hours, 12 and a half minutes. But if the continents weren't interrupting all this tidal stuff, like they are now, the tide could become harmonic and go up and down 200 feet. I believe during Noah's flood, the earth is covered in water. The tide went up and down about 200 feet, which means trillions of tons of water is rushing into the tidal bump. And then as the world turns away, the water has to rush out of the tidal bump. And all the layers that we see on the earth, all of them, except maybe some of the recent stuff like Mount St. Helens layers, things like the local stuff. But the major part of the layers of the earth was formed in one big flood in the days of Noah. But the Bible says the scoffers would be willingly ignorant of that flood, 2 Peter chapter 3. So the substitution rate was assumed by comparing genetic divergence. It's all based on wild assumptions. It isn't science, Chris. I'm sorry, okay? They say if we go back in time, you cannot go back in time. We do not land on a common ancestor split, but rather a bottleneck. So you have carnivore right there. Drawing lines on paper is not evidence they are related. No one has ever seen a skunk produce a non-skunk. There are 10 varieties of skunk based upon man's classification system. The skunks don't care how we classify them. They don't even know we're doing it. But if you let all the skunks in the world loose with all the rest of the animals in the world, the male skunks would seek out a female skunk to mate with, not a pine tree, not an elephant, not a giraffe. I promise you they would. And it would not be a successful mating if it was anything other than their kind. So I think when the Bible says they're going to bring forth after their kind, that's about as scientific as we can get. That's all we've ever observed. We observe cows produce cows and dogs produce cows. You have to imagine that if we could go back millions of years, this is SpongeBob, long ago and far away. So in your little worldview, you think because you see similarities in these various carnivores, that proves they had a common ancestor. Is that logic? Could it be they have a common designer? Is that even a thought in your head that maybe the same guy designed them? They have to live in the same world. They have to eat the same food. Maybe they've got things, same thing. I think you'll find a lot of toolboxes contain pliers, whether it's metric or standard. No such thing as a metric pliers. It'll work for both, won't it? So maybe the designer designed them. Drawing lines on paper is not evidence. These family trees are nothing but artwork and propaganda to brainwash people. It's not science. You can believe that a human and a sunflower and a strawberry are related, but the animals don't know and they don't care that we're classifying them. They know
1
what
minute left.
So I think what you shared tonight, I'll go back over to this presentation later. It's been a busy week around here, but I'll go through your slides and maybe do a whack an atheist on that some night, and you're welcome to join me, or come down to Lenox, Alabama, sit right here and defend the chart. We'll stop one at a time because you said too many things. I couldn't get it all down. You said the fox is not like the others in their order, but yet you think they all had a common ancestor. How do you explain all these differences? And you say because they got X number of differences or X number of similarities, that points back to X number of years ago. That's not common sense, and it's certainly not observable science. So I think the problem is the Romans chapter 1 said it. They did not like to retain God in their knowledge. God gave them over to a reprobate mind. You don't want there to be a creator. You don't want God to design the world. You don't want to give him the authority to say, thus saith the Lord. That's been my experience with atheists and other evolutionists I've debated. It's really a rebellion against God's authority. They don't want God telling them what to do. Okay, we'll see how that works out for you when you're gone. So anyway, I stand by my ground. There is no fossil record. There is no evidence of any ever producing an offspring that we would consider a different kind. You drew a bunch of lines on paper, connecting them, and that is just all it is artwork. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kent, for that 13-minute opening statement. Thank you as well for the prep, for the slides, for the visuals. Dr. Thompson, Dr. Hovind, thank you again for those opening statements. And so we've got a lot of points and arguments now on the table related to tonight's topic of the Oder Carnivora and evolution and ancestry. And so what we'll do is engage these points in more of a free-flowing discussion. What we can do, since Kent just ended with his opening statement, Chris, let's allow you to pick the first topic or ask the first question to kick us off in our discussion. Go ahead.
Yeah, in fact, I'd like to kind of walk through a discussion back and forth with Kent, just to kind of narrow down a little bit more what we're talking about. Because, there's obviously some things that we do agree upon, I hope, at least. And I've actually got some slides that I'd like to present that would help carry this along. All right, so first of all, Kent, a lot of things wrong in what you had to say, but we'll get to it. But first, I want to just see, where you stand on things. Do dogs and wolves share a common ancestor?
I believe they probably do. I don't think we can prove that or show that, but we know dogs and wolves can still mate and produce offspring. So the Bible says if they can bring forth, they're the same kind. So I would say they are the same kind.
So you're saying that they're the same kind. So they share a common ancestor.
Maybe. I don't know where.
Maybe.
One's in Russia. Well, if one's in Russia, one's in someplace else, those two might not have a common ancestor. You mean go back? I don't know how many dogs Noah took on the ark. Might have been more than 2. He took 7 of the clean animals. He might have taken. Or maybe there
dogs
are
considered clean animals.
No, I know, but maybe there were more than 2 dogs on the ark. Yeah. So God told him to bring 2 of each kind, not 2 of each dog. So there may be variations. Okay. But
right. So but you agree that wolves and dogs share a common ancestor?
I would say probably that's correct. Yes.
Probably. Okay. Well, let's just look at some of the evidence, right? So the thing is, with wolves and dogs, there's a study published in 2005. This was the publication of the dog genome. They also looked at genomes of other canids, and they found that yes, indeed, like wolves and dogs share an enormous amount of genetic similarity. Obviously, morphologically, many dogs look very similar to wolves. And what they showed is that like there must have been the most recent common ancestor would have been somewhere around 20 to 30,000 years ago, based on the mutation rate and the substitution rate that we see the differences between dogs and wolves. And that's what the data shows. That's that lineage analysis. Now, do you believe that we can use genetics to show whether people or other animals are related to each other?
Well, you said quite a bit there. Again, the similarity in the DNA may be of a common designer. There are all kinds of computer programs that have similar lines of code.
Right.
Okay?
So you're suggesting that the dog may have been designed by, well, I assume you mean God, right? Jesus
Right.
or, okay,
Yeah.
Was it Jesus?
Well, Jesus is God in the flesh. That's a different argument. I think the ancestor to both of those was
by the Holy Ghost?
No. The dog-like
No.
animal. God gave the original dog-like creatures an incredible variety in the genetic code. They can produce a variety of offspring.
Okay.
Two people, man and wife, can have 10 children, and they're all different. They're still human. They're still related, but they're different.
But
so
you
the dog
agree
and the wolf,
right. Dogs and wolves share a common ancestor.
I
But they
believe
were
they do.
domesticated by humans.
Huh?
You agree. And the genetic evidence clearly shows that. They're not separate kinds, right?
I don't believe the dogs and wolves are separate kinds. No.
Okay.
They're
Great.
right here.
Now let's go through this again. Did these three groups of animals share a common ancestor? We got dogs. We already agree dogs and wolves share a common ancestor. Do they share a common ancestor with the coyote?
I believe so. Coyotes and dogs can crossbreed. Coyotes and wolves can crossbreed.
That's right.
Yes,
Okay. So they're in the same kind. Okay.
Now,
So which of these three?
Wait a minute. Coyotes and bananas cannot. You believe coyotes and
Hey,
bananas?
Ken, we're not talking about bananas. We're only talking about carnivores, right?
But you
So
do,
there's no
you
point
do
in
believe
bringing
they had
up
a common ancestor. You believe bananas and dogs had a common ancestor. I know you do.
And I'm sorry, I got to redirect you to the topic of the debate.
Okay.
Right? We're talking about carnivores. Okay. We're not talking about bananas. All right. So yes, right. The genetic evidence shows that that all these animals are related, right? And you agree that they share a common ancestor, right?
Right.
Okay. Yes. So therefore, we can look to see which one is more closely related to each other. Do you know how we go about doing that?
How do you know how closely related they are?
Yes, we have three different groups of animals here. We got dogs, we got wolves, and coyotes. You agree that they all share a common ancestor. How do we know that they all share a common ancestor?
Yeah, that's where I think the word "know" might be kind of nebulous. How do we know that? We don't observe. All we observe, we know that they can crossbreed coyotes. There probably be a lot of genetic similarity. There might be a lot of morphological similarity. Okay,
So
there might even be evidence.
Right.
Yeah.
What would you say genetically that we would see between these three groups of animals?
I would say none of them have the genetic code to produce feathers. None of them have the genetic code to fly. None of them have the genetic code.
We're talking about carnivores. You don't need to bring up feathers.
I'm answering your question.
These are all mammals. I'm talking about genetically. If you were to look at the genome of the dog, compare it to the wolf, and compare it to the coyote, what would we see?
I've never looked at it, but I think we'd see a lot of identical lines of code. All the lines of code for the DNA to make 4 legs on the animal, not 6 or 8 like an octopus.
And you showed slides from some papers that actually have some of this information in it, but you didn't bother to read it. So let me just explain it to you. So dogs and wolves have more similar genetic codes. So the genetic sequence of dogs and wolves are much more similar to each other than they are to coyotes. Okay. So coyotes is the outgroup. That makes sense, right? Because you agree that these are all within the same kind, right? So, but what that would mean is that Noah must have had some sort of predecessor for all these animals on the ark, that there must have been a population of coyotes or some animal that split off, that evolved into the coyote. And then from there was also wolves. And then maybe humans domesticated some wolf to turn it into a dog. All of this happening within about 4,000 years, correct?
Well, I think the Russian experiment with wolves, with foxes, has domesticated them in less than 100 years. The Russian, right?
Yes, but domestication can happen. But I'm talking about the speciation between wolves and coyotes.
Well, even then, you can force that. Dog breeders do this all the time. Try to take generic dogs and create a Great Dane or a Chihuahua. So yeah, that can be forced.
So I've already shown you the genetic evidence. That's based on genetic evidence that gray wolves and coyotes are pretty closely related. They're not as closely related as wolves are to dogs, but coyotes and wolves are pretty closely related. What about the golden jackal? Would you agree that that's part of the same kind?
I suspect the jackals in the dog kind, right? Biblical dog kind.
Right.
I'm
Okay.
looking for a
And
slide.
again, so right. So they are all descended from a common ancestor. Now we've got 4 different groups of animals. Now dogs and wolves kind of typically fall into as subspecies of each other because they're that genetically similar to each other. But coyotes are definitely a distinct species, and jackals are a distinct species. Okay. Now I'm including the domestic dog, the gray wolf, and the bush dog. Do you consider these to be the same kind?
I'm not familiar with the bush dog. Where is that found, and what is it? Why, who named it? Who named it bush dog? It didn't name itself
remember.
that.
No, he didn't name that.
It didn't name itself that.
It's
So
the
I
bush
don't. I
dog.
can't. Okay.
Do you consider them to be the same? Do you think that these groups of canids, they're all called canids, so they all have morphological features that are specific to canids, the dogs, the wolves, and the foxes? Do you
like I
consider
said,
that they're part of the same kind?
I've never heard of the bush dog. Knowing what little bit you showed me now, I think they may have a common ancestor. Hot dog contains the word dog also, so I don't think.
Yeah, but obviously we're not talking about that.
Yeah, okay.
Try to stay focused, Ken. All right.
I'm focused.
So what about these guys? The dog and the gray wolf. You already agree that has a common ancestor. Do you think that shares that the main wolf also shares an ancestor with the dogs and the wolves?
Probably so. That would be a good field of
So
study.
they're all part of the same kind. Okay, good. So I agree with that. We're really agreeing on an awful lot here. Okay, so this is the raccoon dog. Do you believe that this is also part of the same kind?
I'm not familiar with that one either. There are hundreds of varieties of dogs, so this could make. Why do they call it raccoon dog? Does having those 2 words together mean they're related to a raccoon and a dog? I mean, hot dogs are related to hot and a dog.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's because it has the dark patches around its eyes. That's why.
Ah,
yeah. But
so I don't
agree that it's called the.
I can't ask. I can agree that you've called it a raccoon dog. That I would agree with, but I don't know anything about it.
I don't call it that. It's been called that for centuries.
They called themselves that, or somebody else
didn't call that, but humans have categorized these things.
Right.
All right.
There
This
you
is
go.
the thing.
Okay.
All right. So we can look at the phylogeny of these different animals, and this is then the genetic phylogeny based on of what we were talking about before, which is just looking at the wolves compared to dogs. They went ahead and did sequencing of vast stretches of DNA of a lot of different canids. And here are many of the different kinds of canids, okay? The different types, the different species of canids, okay? All within the dog kind, right? So we're talking about the phylogeny of the wolf kind. So they went ahead and looked at all of these things. The thing is, like within the canids, we find 3 distinct groups. We find the fox-like canids are all more genetically related to each other. And not all of them are called foxes. It turns out the raccoon dog is kind of an outgroup that roots the rest of the foxes, but it's part of the fox-like canids. Then there's the wolves are down here. So we got wolves, the golden jackal, the coyote. They're all in the wolf-like canid group. And then if you look at the genetic similarity of a different kind of group, what we find are the South American canids, which includes the Maine wolf and the bush dog. Now, all of them are more genetically similar to each other than they are to the other families of carnivores. Now, you would agree that this is then, because these are all the same kind, that they all descended from a single common ancestor off of the ark, right?
Well, I would suspect that that's certainly an option. There may have been several different kinds. God may have put 6 dogs on the ark, and maybe the variation is too great to go back to a common ancestor.
I thought Noah put the animals on the ark.
No, Noah just had the door open. The animals came to him. You need to read the King James. But
Gotcha.
I don't think I would extend the chart, though, to include tomatoes as ever being part of that. So
again, we're not talking about tomatoes. We're talking
about
carnivores.
I want to talk about it. You do believe it, though. Dogs are. You believe that. Dogs and tomatoes.
And you believe in this, too. You believe that they evolved from each other. So you believe that the Maine wolf and the bush dog are descended from a common ancestor.
I said I don't know what a bush dog is and a raccoon dog. I'd have to learn more about it. Are they?
We can see that they are actually sister
somebody put them on the chart. I would agree with that. And somebody drew lines between them. I would agree with that.
Why don't we talk about the bush dog and the Maine wolf? Okay, so here's a different phylogeny based on other evidence of just the South American canids, because these guys are actually really fascinating. So basically what we know from evolution is that all of them must have descended from a common ancestor around 3 million years ago. And that's because there were no canids in South America. All the canids, all the fossils of the canids that we find were just in North America, which was split from South America. But then around 3 million years ago, the isthmus that connects South America and North America finally emerged, and there was the Great American Interchange that occurred. And this is something that happened around 3 million years ago. So all of a sudden, now in more recent fossils, around 3 million years ago, you find North American fossils in South America and South American fossils in North America. They're mostly distinct and they evolved separately, but all of a sudden now you have new interchange that occurs. That included the canids. The canids that came out of North America just 3 million years ago, went into South America, and then diverged into these different groups. And they're really extraordinary. So there's quite a bit of variation within the South American canids. There's something called the crab-eating fox. There's a number of other types of foxes. There's the bush dog and the Maine wolf. They're all more genetically similar to each other than they are to any of the other foxes. And you already agree that they are all descended from a single common ancestor. You agree that they're all within the same kind.
Well, no, I did not. I did not. I said some of them I don't know what they are. Is
some
the
of
bush
them might
dog
have been on the ark, right? I guess. Yes.
No,
But
I
we're
don't.
talking about specifically South American canids. Okay.
Okay.
So the interesting thing about the bush dog and the Maine wolf, and the reason why I want to go through this in detail is because this actually answers a lot of the things that you brought up in your introduction. So here I'm showing the actual pictures of the bush dog and the Maine wolf. You can see how unusual they look. The bush dog and the Maine wolf are extraordinarily different overall in their basic anatomy. These are real pictures of these animals, but they're all descended from a single common ancestor. Pretty extraordinary.
You're saying that part. You're showing me a picture and you're claiming something that may be true or it may not be true. Here's a pencil. Here's a coffee cup. That proves they're related. I mean, you're showing, come on now. You're making a statement about the 3 million years ago, too.
Let's get into it. All right, hold on.
We're having a conversation here. You made some claims. You made some claims that we know.
I know more about this than you, so let me just
yes, Master. Yes, Master. Now listen, Master, please let me talk. I think you made some claims that you know what happened 3 million years ago. You know no such thing.
Okay. Yes. So bush dogs are unique amongst the South American canids. They live in dense forests and wetlands. They are hypercarnivorous, which means they only eat meat. There actually aren't too many dogs that only eat meat. In fact, this is the only one. They live in packs and are highly social. They have webbed feet and they have a short, stubby body. The maned wolf is unique amongst the South American canids as well. They live in tall grasslands. They are largely solitary. They have the longest legs, obviously, of any of the canids. You can see just how unique their feature is. They have those long legs because they live in tall grasslands. And the majority of their calories come from eating fruit, primarily something called the wolf apple, which is an apple that has co-evolved with the maned wolf. That's found that provides nearly 50% of their calories that they take in. So, okay, the thing is, the bush dog and the Maine wolf are more genetically similar to each other than they are to any other canid. But you agree that they're from the same common ancestor, right?
I did not agree to that yet, but I think they could be.
So they're
I'm not saying I don't agree. Don't put words in my mouth. I said I don't know. They may be worthy of study.
They are as similar genetically as, say, a coyote is to a wolf.
Okay. Same designer, wrote the code.
Same designer. Okay. That's why. So you're saying that you're not part of the same kind.
I did not say any such thing. They may be. They've given it the name bush dog, so it's hot dog. Okay. But it's not just, so I wouldn't go by the name. It may be they are related, and I've never heard of it till just tonight. Okay. There's probably a lot of animals you and I've never heard of in the world. Okay. So
well, I prepared for this, so I actually learned a lot about carnivores.
The fact that the fact that
so
this one wolf can live on fruit.
I just want to make sure Ken can finish his thoughts here. Then
Fair
Chris
enough.
will right.
Yeah, please,
Hey, no worries. That this is good, free flowing, organic. It's what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So Chris, we'll stick with that slide. Kent, feel free to respond, and then we'll move right to the next point.
This is not really a discussion. This is more of a lecture of his. He's done 90% of the talking in the last 10 minutes. Okay. So, and he's trying to put words in my mouth. He does not know anything that happened 3 million years ago. He mentioned we know from the fossil record about these dogs. There is no fossil record. All the fossils probably formed in Noah's flood. Fossils aren't forming today. Animals died by the millions in the last 5 years. None of them fossilized. We see trillions of fossils in the ground. If you want to count diatoms, we find quadrillions and quintillions of fossils. We don't see it happening today. I think it's ludicrous to say we can know something about the creatures 3 million years ago because we found some bones in the dirt. You don't know. You're going on the geologic column again. There is no such thing as a geologic column. How can the layers be different ages, Chris? Are they coming from outer space or something? How can the top layer be younger?
Deposition. And actually, you had your little sand toy That's kind of how it happens, right? You get a layer that happens, and then another layer will come on from a different event that brought in more silt on top of it, or say limestone. If you talk about limestone layers, that's totally precludes the ability of Noah's flow to occur. You cannot get the formation of limestone in the turbidity that would be happening during Noah's flood. It's impossible. You cannot have limestone form. It has to form in calm, quiet conditions.
So layers moved over to another place, and now they're a different age because they moved. Is that your logic?
No, it's not because they moved. Let's talk about limestone for just a moment, because I know that you've been doing this for 50 years, but somehow you're still confused.
No, you mentioned something before you mentioned the limestone. Okay. You said we know a layer can be moved, sediment can be moved from here to here on top.
That does happen.
Right, but that doesn't make it a different age. If I shuffle a deck of cards and move the queen on top, is it now younger than the rest?
No. We use dating for specific layers that are all within the geological column that have specific sort of radiological features. So then you can use radiological dating to date those things. Listen, Kent, but we're getting away from the topic of carnivore.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
I stand my ground. There is no such thing as a geologic column. It does not exist. There are layers to the earth, no question. And they may contain certain fossils, no question. And the fossils may be sorted. But the fossils are sorted based upon other things than evolution. The clams are found at the bottom because the clams are at the bottom when the flood starts.
We're not talking about clams. We're not talking about clams. And they're not found at the bottom. I find clams at the top of mountains here.
You're right. Mount Everest has petrified closed clams on it. Your whole argument, though.
They date to 400 million years ago.
Donnie, get a timer. Make sure we get equal time. Okay. You're basing your argument upon these dogs in South America, claiming you slap and run. Well, 3 million years ago, this happened. No, I don't believe that. You don't know when these dogs live, and the Earth cannot be millions of years old for lots of reasons. That's another argument. But so the maned wolf and the other one you showed have some differences. Bush dog. Yeah. I would say the Great Dane and the Chihuahua have some differences too. Huge differences. Look at them. They're still a dog. It's not evolution. It's a variation of the dog. Dog, wolf, coyote probably had a common ancestor. I don't argue that. But that doesn't prove they're related to a banana, which you want to teach all the kids in school.
We're not talking about bananas, kids.
I know you don't want to, but you do believe they're related.
We're not talking about bananas.
I know you're not.
You've gone bananas, my friend. I'm sorry. But we're not talking about bananas. We're not talking about tomatoes. We're not talking about pine trees. We're not talking about mosquitoes.
Okay, let's talk about wolf apple. This maned wolf eats the wolf apple. Do you think that maned wolf is related to the wolf apple? They both got the word wolf in there. Got to be proof or something.
So, Kent, the thing is, the maned wolf and the bush dog are more genetically similar to each other. But the thing is, they've obviously undergone substantial changes because they are in very different kinds of environments. You got bush dogs with webbed feet, maned wolves with their long legs. They're largely frugivorous, whereas bush dogs are hypercarnivorous. So they've compared the genomes of these two animals, and that's what we're looking at here, where we're looking at like specific kinds of what are called private alleles in bush dogs or in maned wolves. And what they find is because of, so basically what a private allele is. Well, Kent, do you know what a private allele is?
I haven't heard that word in a long time. It's been, I've heard it. I don't remember what it is. Private allele. Go ahead. Tell me what it is.
So a private allele refers to an allele that's going to be specific in, say, one group of animals or in one group of that you don't find in the other groups. Okay.
Right.
So they all have the same genes, right? But they have different kinds of alleles. And that means that there have been mutations that must have happened between these two groups because they share a common ancestor.
You don't know any such thing. There you just went from science to religion.
Okay.
You believe it happened because of a mutation.
Focus. We're talking about animals that have genetic similarity just as much as coyotes and wolves. And you already agreed that coyotes and wolves are from the same kind.
I believe they probably are, but you're not seeing what you're doing. You're going from a scientific fact that there are some similarities and slipping in your religious belief that this proves common ancestor. Say that last thing again you said before that. You said what about the private alleles? Start and go slow, and let me stop you line by line if I have to.
Private alleles are those that are unique to one group of animals compared to another group of animals. And so they went through and compared all the genome of the bush dog to a bunch of different canids, including the maned wolf. And they also compared the genome of the maned wolf to a bunch of different canids, including the bush dog. And they would look for unique alleles within each of these animals and try to, and determined what these genes are involved with. So because they have a unique allele, it means there's been some sort of mutation within those particular genes that
does not mean any such thing.
Just give me a moment.
It doesn't mean any such thing.
It means you're saying, So the fact that there's this unique allele in just these animals alone and not in any other canid, because you already agreed that the canids are all the same kind. And if you're going on a limb and you're saying that the canids are not all in the same kind, then you are taking a position that's very different than all other young Earth creationists.
Well, keep going slowly now, but I want to interrupt as you make what I would consider.
What we're looking at are these are private alleles in specific genes.
Right.
And what they found is that there's about 115 private alleles that are unique amongst the bush dogs and the Maine wolves. And around 12 of them, so around 10% of all the private alleles, have to do with limb length and elongation. And because the bush dog and the Maine wolf are so unique in their overall limb morphology, that actually makes a lot of sense. So 2 of these is IGF and IHH, and that we know from other studies that they're heavily involved in limb length. And this provides evidence that there must have been mutations that have allowed for the unique adaptations for these animals to have.
You went off the rails right there. It does not prove any such thing. I would agree.
Even though you agree that they're descended from a common ancestor.
There are genes that allow for that have to do with limb growth. I understand that. That's why we get dwarfism and stuff in humans too. Okay, I agree. But that does not prove a common ancestor. It does not prove it came from a mutation. Maybe something was already.
You agree that these are from a common ancestor.
They probably are. I don't know. I did not agree to that. I said they probably are. I'll study it. Okay.
You're gonna go contrary to what all other young Earth creationists say.
I didn't say I do that either. Would you stop putting words in my mouth? I said I don't know. I've never.
You're not taking a position on anything.
Okay. I said I've never heard of the bush dog till tonight, but I will look into that and study it. But the fact that they have different limb lengths, I think you'd find 2 parents could produce 10 children that all have different limb lengths too, and the children coming from the same mom and dad. I think there may be a genetic diversity built into the code. That's fine. I think that's evidence of a great design. God designed the animals so some of them can survive better in cold weather, some survive better in hot weather. Some need the tall grass, they survive better. So it might be already designed into the code.
But like how can that happen if they all are descended from a single common ancestor?
Hey, General Motors produces cars. Some have heaters, some have air conditioners. Same car. Okay. Wow, they do the opposite thing. So, that's a good design feature. Right. This might be a good design feature. Some might want to live in areas where they got to crawl under stuff and they need short legs. I don't know. I will study it, and I'll do a whack an atheist just for you. Okay, I'll get into this when I get time.
So, okay,
you become famous.
There's another. So let's move on to a different topic. I wanted to talk about this issue of common design. So you've brought up multiple times that animals that have similar genetic sequences that's probably, and because obviously then they must also have similar morphological features, that they would then have a common designer, right? I argue that that's from a common ancestry, but you would say that it's because of a common designer. Is that right?
I think you'd find we've got 1947 Willys and all the way up to 2019 Jeep, and they all got the horizontal radiator bars to going through there. It's a standard. Jeep designs all their vehicles that way. I think that's a good design. They like it. I think you'd find similarities in design in different vehicles because it's coming from General Motors as opposed to, I think they're metric instead of standard, the same designer. So I don't think you could prove either way. But you want to call yours science, and I'm calling it, both of them are religion. We believe.
So you're believing, okay, so you're not believing in anything. You're not calling what you believe science. You're saying that what you believe is religion.
Oh, I believe a lot of science is involved. I think the science is what we can observe, study, and test. We observe dogs produce dogs. We see that. We do not observe dogs coming from a common ancestor with a tomato or a banana. I know you don't want to talk about that, but that is what you guys want to see.
But we do see that they have similar DNA to wolves and to jackals and to bush dogs and to Maine wolves, right?
Do you understand how complex the DNA code is? And you think it happened by chance? So do I. And you think it happened by chance?
Right.
You think a computer could a computer code for Microsoft PowerPoint happen by chance?
You're following your script. I know they're 80% similar. The Excel and the Word.
I'm following the script because it's true. I've been teaching for years. 2 + 2 is 4.
Listen, all right, Kent, I want to get to another topic.
2 + 2 is 4. Right. I'm going to stay on that script.
Let's talk about this issue of common design and genetics, right? Okay.
How would you know?
If you don't mind sharing some slides, I want to get Kent.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure it's as fair as possible. It's been great discussion so far. Chris, you asked several questions. So before I put this next slide up, Kent, if you had a question or two that you wanted to ask Chris, I think you were just about to ask a question, actually, Kent. Feel free to do so.
Me? Well, he's pointing out that there are Could it be a common design? The fact that there's similar lines of code. The code is incredibly complex. I think a person could study an author and see what somebody wrote and find certain sentences in Charles Darwin's book. I think he wrote, I don't know, wrote two, I'm not sure how many. I think you'd find similar, maybe identical sentences in the same, in the book, because the same author's writing the book. Okay, I've written 67 books. Probably find a lot of phrases that are identical in my books because it's the same me doing it. So if there's similar lines of code in a dog and the bush dog and the Maine wolf, that does not prove common ancestry. In your mind, that's the only option, but there's another wide open option you're missing totally. The same designer probably wrote the code. Probably those animals, I point out that computer code to make a robot squeeze its fingers in and pick up a coffee cup. There's thousands of lines of code just to simply pick up a coffee cup with a computer operated hand, maybe even millions of lines of code to do that. So the reason monkeys and humans probably have those same lines of code in their DNA to flexures and relax the extenders and to grip things is because it's a code that's necessary to flex your fingers and pick something up. It doesn't prove a common ancestry. But you would look at lines of code in the different kinds of wolves and see 87% similar. Okay, it may be true. And then your conclusion is same ancestor. No, that's the false conclusion from the good evidence, and you came to the false conclusion. It could be a common designer. Both are possible. You refuse to even consider the design option. I don't know why, but I think it's what you have shared tonight is your religious belief that these have a common ancestor. I just want to stop before the audience gets confused. That's not provable.
Okay. Let's talk about that. I think that's a fair point. And I'd like actually to, if you could share my slide, that actually gets exactly what we're talking about. So, right. So you're arguing that the reason why carnivores have all very similar genetic codes is because they obviously have similar morphological features. They've got these carnassials, they eat meat, a lot of them. Of course, we've got exceptions like the Maine wolf, that kind of thing. But so you would say that obviously similar designs would have to have a similar genetic code. And that would mean obviously that must be that there's a common designer designing that genetic code, right?
I didn't say obviously. I think there are two options. It had the same ancestor or the same designer. Neither one is provable. You can believe whichever one you'd like, and you've already chosen.
So, okay. So you're saying that like similar morphological features would have to imply that there's a similar genetic code, and that therefore that would mean that there's a common design, right?
Or they've gone through a common trauma. I think if you went to a place where all the trees had fruit up high, only tall people could survive in such a place. And pretty soon, after hundreds of years of people living there, they'd all be tall people. So that nature can select for something. There's artificial selection, natural selection. If you turn all the dogs in the world loose in Alaska, only those with thick fur are going to survive. Come back in 10 years, there won't be any dingoes. They can't survive. The hair's too thin. Won't be any greyhounds. Nature selected something that already existed, hair, to have the longer hair.
Okay.
Turn them all loose in Africa and the Sahara Desert. Now the dingoes will survive and the wolves won't because the hair is too thick.
Right.
Nature's
all right. So carnivores look similar, right? Obviously. That's one thing that kind of distinguish carnivores. I talked about that they have similar morphology. They're going to have the sharp teeth. They're going to be eating meat, that kind of thing. So therefore, they're going to have similar genetic codes. And that would be your argument that, so for me, I would say, well, that's evidence of common a descent because their genetic similarity isn't necessarily because of common design, right? But you're saying because they are similar in overall morphology and because they have similar genetics, that must mean that there's a common design.
Well, I think you're living out a giant gaping hole in your logic here. This DNA code that they're comparing is more complex than the space shuttle. Oh yeah.
There's only 4 nucleotides.
How many different ways can they be arranged? You know how many different DNA? How
many ways could you combine 4 different letters?
That'd be 4 to the 4th power, I guess. I could do some figuring on that. But are you saying there's only 16 or 64 different kinds of creatures in the world? This genetic code. Okay. The code that you have in your DNA, one person's DNA, unwound and stretched out, would go across the solar system twice. That's one person's DNA from all 100 trillion cells. Across the solar system twice. You think it happened by chance.
What does that mean? Like, who cares about that?
That means it's too complex to just say,
it doesn't mean it's complex. It just means it's long.
It's complex. The DNA
you're taking
code,
a trillion copies and lining them up against each other.
Oh, it's way more. That's why I asked if you understand DNA and how complex it is.
So, okay.
I don't think you do.
Fine. Complex. I agree that it's more complex than other things. More complex than the space shuttle. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but because the space shuttle has a lot more parts to it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Anyway,
so do humans.
So we're going
humans.
to the carnivores. Back to the carnivores again.
Right.
If we're talking about similar morphology, that they should have similar genetics. Okay. So the thing is, Kent, not all the animals on here are carnivores. Okay. So not just because everything looks similar to what a carnivore is doesn't necessarily mean that it is a carnivore. In fact, what we see as far as genetics go is that there's a lot of surprises that come about. So, for instance, the Tasmanian tiger, if you look at its overall genetic code, it's actually much more similar to the bush-tailed possum or the Tasmanian devil or the gray short-tailed opossum or the marsupial mole than it is to any of the other carnivores. So it's more genetically similar. So if we're talking about just cytochrome B, it's 90% similar to all of these other marsupials than it is to the dog or the wolf or the bear or the fox. It's even more similar to humans and mice than it is to these other animals, despite the fact that these have similar overall morphology. You would imagine that if there is a common designer, that there would be carnivore-like genes that they would pick and they would put into carnivore-like animals. And that's not what we see. Animals that have carnivore-like morphology, like the Tasmanian devil or the Tasmanian tiger, they have marsupial-like genes, and they're more similar to kangaroos and wallabies than they are to actual carnivores like dogs and wolves and bears and foxes. What is your explanation for the fact that you can have a totally carnivore-like morphology, but that they're much more like other animals that look nothing like them than they are to other animals that look like carnivores?
Well,
what is the creationist argument for that?
Okay, you're showing me a lot of numbers, 90.5%, et cetera, as if this proves something. Okay, I don't know how they made those numbers. I'd be willing to bet
I could get numbers up. Just let me interrupt.
Wait a minute. No,
you can look these numbers up yourself.
Okay,
you can go
I'll
to the
give you an
NCI
illustration.
database.
Maybe you'll understand. Yeah. I can pick any two
I
books
know how
out
to
of my
look
library.
at these numbers, and I did this myself.
Wow.
Okay, let's just give Kat the chance to respond, and then Chris.
I just want to correct him because he's saying they came up with these numbers. I looked up these numbers myself. All of this information is publicly available.
That makes me believe it even less, but okay. So if I could pick any two books in my library, I got 50,000 books here. Okay, I bet I could go through and count how many times did the author use the letter A. I bet I could find 90% similarity in two totally different books because they both use the letter A 947 times or something. Okay. I think I could count how many times they use the word, they use the. I could find similarities in just about any book written in English based on the letters, based on the words, based on maybe sometimes whole sentences. What does that prove? Nothing. This is all vaporware here. It may be that they have a common ancestor. It may be they have a common designer, but it doesn't exclude the common designer, the evidence you've shared. Maybe the wolf and the dog, 80.7%. Have common lines of code because they got to do the same thing. They have to walk on four legs. They have to see. They have to have ears on the side of their head. They have to have a tongue. Maybe there's lots of similarities because they have similar designer to do the same function in life. I think man has lots of DNA code to flex your fingers because we do that. Trees don't have that. Okay, they don't have any lines of code to flex their fingers like we do. So you're observing a good observation and coming to the wrong conclusion. You've already ruled out there can't be a creator. I think that's really premature. So for the sake of the argument, I would agree there are lots of similarities, even in the DNA code of lots of these animals. I would agree. That does not prove a common ancestor, and it does not prove anything happened 3 million years ago. You can't go back in time and prove anything.
Where do you find the difference, though? Because you agree that some of these animals are related to each other, and we see that there are genetic differences that are between, say, coyotes and wolves. Where do you draw the line between the wolf kind and, say, the raccoon kind?
Well, the Bible says they can bring forth after their kind. Raccoons and dogs cannot mate and bring forth. Dogs and coyotes can. Coyotes and wolves can. Wolves and dogs can. All has been done. The coy wolf, let's see, here's a coyote Australian shepherd mix. Wolves in the eastern United States can mate with coyotes. So they're the same kind. None of these coyotes, wolves, or dogs can mate with palm trees or raccoons or possums. So they're a different kind. As far as exactly where the line is for kind in all cases, that's an interesting field of study. But I'm not demanding that my interpretation be taught to the schools at taxpayer expense. You want your interpretation of the data to be taught exclusively to students, and nobody else gets to. You can't share any other options. In your mind, it's common to ancestor, no options. Shut the book.
Right.
Take
But
the
you agree
example of
that
the
there's
book.
common ancestry that occurs and that there's evolution that happens.
I
But
think
all this must have happened within the last 4,000 years, right?
Well, it's a different topic about the time. I think my brothers and I have a common ancestor, mom and dad.
Right.
Okay.
And based
we
on
probably have
genetics, we
common-
can also show that, right?
Maybe so. Therefore,
Not
I'm
maybe.
related to
I mean,
a tomato.
it's like in proof of law, you can do this. You can go into a court and demonstrate paternity.
Sure.
Yes.
Can they in a court of law demonstrate that humans have a common ancestor with sunflowers? Can that be done in a court of law?
It doesn't matter. We're not talking about
It does. I know, but that's what they're being taught.
Okay.
That's what kids are being taught.
But with our ancestry, we can tell an awful lot because of these differences that have arisen.
Right.
Like
Well,
there are mutations that get arise.
Right. Just stick with carnivores.
Lineage. Right.
You asked about You asked about carnivores. Do I believe dogs and raccoons have a common ancestor? I said no. I don't believe that. I think God created the raccoon kind. I don't know how many kinds of raccoons there are, probably 8 or 10 different varieties. And this is all man-made artificial classification. The animals don't care.
Artificial. No, I understand that. Okay, well, if you want to talk about raccoons, why don't we talk about that?
Sure.
So I have, I prepared a whole set of slides for that. Let's talk about the raccoons and the raccoon kind. So there's actually 12 different species of raccoons across.
Yeah, it was a guess. I said 8 different. Okay, so 12.
Yes, right. You're pretty close. That's fine. Yeah, you're pretty close. So, right, this is Procyonidae, okay? So there's 12 different species. They cannot interbreed. There's some that can, right? For instance, the common raccoon can breed with the Cozumel raccoon, but the Kinkajou cannot breed with anything else. The half cats cannot breed with the raccoons. The coatis cannot breed with the lingos or anything like that. But there's 5 major genuses. There's the Kinkajou, which interestingly is one of the, like I said, most of the carnivores actually are carnivorous, but this is a little guy that's actually entirely herbivorous, but he does have carnassial teeth and he has all the other carnivore features. And he's put within the raccoon kind. Then, of course, there are the raccoon-like animals within Procyon. Then there's the half cats, which are within this genus. We have the Alingos, which are in South America and Central America. There's 4 different species of those. And then we have the coatis, which are also just found in South America. Okay, so this is the raccoon kind, okay? And the thing is, with that, of course, raccoons, they have certain morphological features that distinguish them to be from other carnivores.
Okay, let's go one point at a time. Can you back up to your last slide?
Yeah, fine.
You said they were put into the raccoon kind. Did they put themselves in on this chart? Did they decide they're part of the raccoon family, or did some man do this?
Based on this. I'm glad that you asked. So it's based on anatomical morphological features. They have broader molars and reduced carnassials. They have certain other kinds of morphological features that distinguish them from carnivores. But the other thing is that they're more genetically similar to each other. So this is another study.
You didn't answer my question. Did they put themselves into this category, or did some man put them into this category?
I don't know if that actually matters. I mean, we're categorizing them. Obviously, we're human beings. We like to do categorization.
You're avoiding the question, Your Honor.
We're trying to understand.
All these classification, these classifying animals, etc. This is all being done by man, and the animals aren't paying the least bit of attention to it. They don't know they're put in the
and evolutionists alike do the same thing.
Oh yeah, I think I like classifying
put them into the raccoon kind, right?
Yeah, I put my hammers in one side with my wrenches over here. I can separate them, but the wrenches don't care. The raccoons don't care that we call them a raccoon.
But I mean, I pointing out Noah would have cared, right? So which of these kinds did he include?
No, I'm going to find out when I get to heaven. We're going to watch the video up in heaven of all the animals coming on board.
So the thing is, okay, so we can also do molecular dating. We can determine when these animals diverged from each other within a kind, right? Because you agree that the mustelids are all one kind, all right? All 57 different species are all one kind. That the procyonids are all one kind. That the Aluridae, which is the red panda, that there's only one species of that, but that's its own family. And then the Mephidae, which is the skunks and the stink badgers, they're all one kind as well. But we have phylogenies within a kind, and when we do the molecular dating, unfortunately, none of it matches with the young Earth creationist model. And we can do this. So we're getting back to just the raccoons. Okay, so if I take the raccoon ancestry here, this is the raccoon phylogeny based on molecular data. So molecular dating, looking at genetic differences to see how they are related to each other. Now, the thing is...
you're going way too fast. You're skipping about 5 topics here. Molecular dating. Move back to your slide before that. You're telling me that you know, based on molecular dating, that these things split off in the Oligocene or the early Miocene era.
Yep.
You don't know any such thing. This is a bunch of lines on paper, is all it is. You don't know that they're related. I don't know how many different kinds of animals that later became carnivores Noah took on the ark. I'll find out one day. Before the flood came, all the animals were vegetarian. And many animals today, like the lion in London Zoo, that they didn't have any meat for it, made it through the whole war, World War II, living on vegetables. Didn't like it, but it could do it. So I think maybe all the carnivores could possibly live on vegetables, vegetation, if they had to. So I think you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Making a mountain out of a molehill here. The similarities in these animals, this whole classification system is us doing it to the animals. They know what to look for in a mate. And they don't even know what they look like. But they know what to look for in a mate. Strange. Very strange.
Sure. Right. So the problem is that the phylogeny, if you want to take the molecular dating and you just assume that if we're talking about the same kind, if we're talking about just
I don't believe there's any such thing as molecular dating. I think you're blowing smoke here, but go ahead.
Okay. So
molecular
we already
dating.
went through this with the coyote and the gray wolf and the dog. That the less because the coyote is less genetically similar to dogs and wolves, that they shared a more distant common ancestor than dogs and wolves themselves.
Right there, you just said something you cannot possibly know. You can believe that, but that's not science. You don't know it's a more distant.
So how else do you explain? How else do you explain coyotes are less genetically similar to the dogs and the wolves? How do you explain that?
Well, if you
believe that they all share a common ancestor, yes,
I suspect they do, and I think they can.
Why are coyotes less genetically similar than the wolves are to the dogs and the dogs are to the wolves?
Well, I don't know, but you certainly can't put a date on it based on that.
Why not?
It's not science. It's not observable science. We don't observe these animals.
Science. Explain why you can't put a date. We can observe mutation rates right now.
You're going by mutation rate.
Germline.
Lots of things affect mutation rate.
Those studies, like you actually included a slide
right.
from the mutation rate in the germline, which shows that in fact that the germline mutation rate is too slow to be explained by through the young Earth creationist model. It's way too slow.
Here we go. This is from nature.com and ncbi. Let's see. Mutation rates are not constant and can be influenced by various factors, including the genetics of the organism and environmental influences. For stable genomes, mutation rate is 10 to the minus 10th per base pair per cell. However, in certain physiological conditions, such as immune systems generation of diversity, the mutation rate can increase dramatically, sometimes exceeding the basal rate by more than 1,000,000-fold.
Let's
the people that you respect in peer-reviewed journals are saying the mutation rates are not something that's reliable to measure things by.
Okay.
But you want to measure things by it.
Explain to me how an increase in the mutation rate in the immune system would have any effect on offspring. If I as an individual get sick, or if I have like an increased mutation rate in the immune system, how will that have any impact on the genetic makeup of my offspring?
Well, unless it affects you don't live to make babies. Okay, that's my. So mutation rates, whatever system they're in, whether in the reproductive system or in the immune system, the mutation rate, you cannot know that it's always. You can't count on that. You can go for generations and never have any mutations. You could have 100 mutations in one person. There are lots of mutations out there.
Generations without mutations. I'm sorry.
Okay. Can you name the best you know of a beneficial mutation that added information? Just one.
Sure.
I can show you lots of negative mutations.
I can name one.
Okay, let's hear it.
I mean, unfortunately, that means we'd have to talk about a different debate topic.
Well, we'll do that another night. But I'm pointing out mutations are harmful, fatal, or neutral. They don't do any good.
I wanted to talk about carnivores, right? So,
well, if you had a beneficial mutation, now you got to have two opposite sex in the same place at the same time in history. The odds of this happening and changing it to something else is zero. Not going to happen.
How does a mutation in the immune system have any impact on the offspring of that individual?
Good question. Maybe it doesn't, but a mutation in the reproductive system would. Okay. Are you saying we know the mutation rate in reproductive system, even though the mutation rate in the immune system has more than 1,000,000-fold difference?
What difference does that make? It's not getting into the germline. The immune system is outside of the germline. When if I have offspring,
right,
it's only coming from the germline. My immune system could have a trillion-fold
Sure.
mutation
You're
rate.
missing
It
the
won't
point.
matter if it doesn't actually affect the germline, because that's the only thing that you pass on to the
Right.
next
Okay,
generation.
forget that slide. They showed that in the immune system,
stuff that you're saying.
Wait a minute now. In the immune system, there can be a lot of varieties in the rate of mutation. I would say in the reproductive system, the germline, we could also have a lot of varieties of. All your last slide was basing your conclusion on a mutation rate, which you cannot possibly know the mutation rate in the reproductive system either.
Yes,
you can't know it's constant, and you certainly can't know
pedigree study. Okay, Kent, you talked about pedigree studies. What is a pedigree study? How do you determine mutation rate in pedigree studies?
I don't know how mutation rates are determined in that. It's a good study. I'll have to look at that.
Yes,
I know.
Yes, that's the whole point about pedigree phylogeny and
right.
Studies.
Is
that you can actually measure the mutation rate directly. And there's a 2023 paper in Nature. You just quoted Nature. I'm sure you're a big fan of reading Nature. I can send you the link to this paper. You actually had a slide from it, so I don't know. Maybe you read it. I doubt it. But that's the one that actually shows mutation rate in the germline. Okay, but the slide that I'm talking about here. Okay, we're just talking about differences.
For the record, are you claiming still that we know the mutation rate in the reproductive system, the germline? We know that it's consistent enough to make some conclusions based on it.
Yes, it's incredibly
That's what you're claiming.
consistent.
Okay, I believe that's baloney.
It's much slower. Yes, you can read this 2023 paper.
Oh, if that paper, it's got to be true. Got to be true. Yeah.
They looked at 63 different species and 150 some parent-offspring trios, which is how you do pedigree analysis of mutation rate. And yes, they found that, in fact, the mutation rate in the germline is actually quite consistent. There's variation, but that range of variation is way outside, which would allow for the younger creationist model to allow for universal common ancestry within kind. Cool. So that's what I'm talking about here. So just wait. Let me explain this slide, because it's been up here a while, and I'm sure people are confused. We're talking about other stuff. So if you assume that just the raccoons are one kind, and then you look at what is the last common ancestor based on molecular dating methods, just assuming a younger creationist model, that the kinkajou would have separated from the other raccoon-like animals around the time when the flood occurred. If we say that speciation occurred basically on day one of the flood, that there was already a speciation event that allowed for the kinkajou to evolve. That's Potus flavus. That would have happened around 2373 BC. 2376 BC. Now, if we do further molecular dating, you can find that there are additional splits when there was a last common ancestor between these different groups because of the similarity of the genetic code. I know you don't understand it, but this is exactly how it works. That would mean that at 1594 BC, there was then the split between the kinkajous and the oligos, or sorry, not the kinkajous, but these guys and the olingos. And then that around the birth of Christ, around 0, or the time of the Romans, would be when there was the split between the ring-tailed cat and the raccoons. And the dating just simply doesn't work. The speciation events that are happening for these species right here would have to have happened around the time when the Constitution was being signed in Philadelphia. It just doesn't make any sense. The dating doesn't work.
Go back to your last slide.
Sure.
You said the raccoon and what's the other one? Ringtail?
The ringtail cat.
Cat, okay. You're saying you know that about the time of Christ, they diversified. How on earth did you know that?
Based on molecular dating.
There we go again.
Okay.
So you know that's when it happened. You know what if they're not even related at all?
But it's the same thing that we do for coyotes and jackals and the other canids.
Okay, can the ringtail cat mate with the raccoon?
No, it can't.
Okay, well then they're a different kind, aren't they?
They're different kinds. Okay.
I agree. So I think they've always been a different kind. God said they'd always
bring forth after their kind. That means that Noah then had a lot more different groups of kinds than like what Answers in Genesis is willing to say.
Oh, could be. I don't work for them, but could be a lot more different kinds on there.
You're right. You're splitting now, instead of at families, which is what Answers in Genesis does. You're now splitting down to the genus level. So basically, we're going to have to split all these kinds finer and finer because it doesn't actually line up with the genetic evidence.
Even then, I wouldn't use the Carolus lineage classification system at all. I don't know if the kind is the same as family or genus. I don't know. I don't think it's possible to know that. Our classification system may not match God's. I know if you get a ringtail cat and it won't mate with a raccoon, you can't prove it had a common ancestor.
What I do know is that they're more genetically similar to each other.
That's a great design, too. A great design.
And
if I could jump in, gentlemen, if I could jump in, it's been so good and fast paced and thorough.
Starting to get a little redundant.
This is good. We're a couple minutes over, but I did want to make sure that it is as evenly timed and fair as possible. So before we go into closings, Kent, was there any final questions you wanted to pose towards Chris? I know this was more free flowing and less strict in terms of cross exam, but if you did have a final question or two you wanted to throw at Chris, feel free to do so before we get into closings.
What mutations do you have from your parents? Do you have any mutations in your germline?
I mean, I'm sure there are mutations in my germline, but I also have
mutations. What mutations do you have?
It's thought that any given human has probably accumulated somewhere between 40, 50 mutations from their parents.
Which ones do you have?
I wouldn't know because there's 3 billion pairs.
So you don't know what mutations you have, but you know what mutations the cat had 3 million years ago.
Because we have the full sequence and we can compare the consensus sequence of specific, ultra conserved regions.
Okay. Do you have
other species and see? And if you just count the nucleotide substitutions, you can date these things. Ken, I get that this is hard.
I'm pointing out for the record for those who have a brain to think about it. You don't even know what mutations you have. Do you have any children that have mutations? Have you passed on mutations to any of your children? Do you have any children?
Mutations happen in every single generation.
Which ones? What is mutated about you?
A mutation simply refers to a change in a nucleotide. That's all it is.
Positive or negative? Are there more negative than there are positive mutations?
As we know, they're mostly neutral. Sometimes they're negative, and occasionally they're actually beneficial.
What's the best beneficial one you know of?
This is the process of natural selection. Do you actually think that natural selection occurs? You did already said that natural selection occurs.
Right. And so does artificial
selection. So you agree
selection.
that there can be beneficial mutations?
No, I did not say that. I said I agree natural selection.
Then you don't believe in natural selection.
Natural selection only selects. It has nothing to do with mutations. Natural selection selects generally the strongest to survive. It has nothing to do with mutations. You could turn all the dogs in the world, none of them mutated up in Alaska, and only those with long fur would survive. It's got nothing to do with mutation. It has to do with having long fur to keep warm.
What determines if something is quote unquote strong or not?
Well, Charles Darwin's Origin of Species by means of natural selection, the preservation of favored races. I think we go by which one can survive, but that changes wildly with what climate they're in. The wolves don't survive well in the desert. The dingoes don't survive well in Alaska. They're still dogs. They're still capable of interbreeding. But you don't even know what mutations you have, and yet you want to tell me what mutations a coyote had 3 million years ago. Okay. Chris, wake up. You swallowed the Kool-Aid.
I guess so.
Gentlemen, you know what? There's a good place to end it. I think that was thorough. We got about 54 minutes of free-flowing discussion on the topic of ancestry, evolution, and specifically the order Carnivora. But what I want to do, since the discussion was fast-paced, it was thorough, we'll have some closing statements. We'll go 3 minutes each. This will give you both the opportunity to solidify your cases. This will give you both the opportunity to address anything you feel has been left hanging, perhaps something you didn't get the opportunity to address or say in the discussion. For the audience sake, in a nutshell, what we're dealing with here is universal ancestry within the order Carnivora, which Chris holds to, or separate ancestries in the order Carnivora that Kent holds to. So really it's going to come down to the question, which position, universal ancestry within that specific order or separate ancestry, which position better accounts for the data Chris and Kent discussed, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, over the last 54 minutes, phylogenetics, phylogeny, mutation rates, DNA similarities, hierarchies. And so which position better accounts for the data, gentlemen? So let's give you each 3 minutes to solidify your positions on that question. Chris, we'll start with you. You just let me know when you're ready. You got 3 minutes.
Let me, yeah, I'm actually going to throw up a slide here real quick.
Sure.
Well, that will help.
Which means to the audience, you got about 6 minutes left to send in your final questions. Again, maybe you've heard something that Chris said, something Ken said that you want to challenge or object to. Send those in. Keep it respectful. No attacking the debaters, please. And we'll have some
Leave
fun.
that up to the debaters to attack each other, not us, you attacking us. So.
It's been a lively debate here between you guys and
Indeed.
lively in the live chat. We've got a solid.
Oh, is it? I haven't even been looking. Okay.
Oh,
good.
it's you'll have some fun after rewatching.
Awesome. All right.
Okay, go
so the thing about molecular dating is that we can just look at overall numbers of substitutions in certain genes, say the cytochrome C gene, which is important for overall metabolism. And you can compare certain mammalian pairs, and you can find that the number of substitutions that we see in these genes are going to be consistent with what we know to be the fossil last common ancestor that we can find in the fossil record. So if you talk about, say, sheep versus goat or horse versus donkey, the last common ancestor we can find in the fossil record is on the order of around 6 to 8 million years ago. And of course, they have the fewest number of substitutions in just the cytochrome C. When you compare animals that are quite disparate from each other, say humans and kangaroos, they're very disparate from each other. There's a lot more substitutions with the cytochrome C gene when you compare the human cytochrome C to the kangaroo cytochrome C. And we also know that the last common ancestor for the eutherians and the metatherians, the placental groups and the marsupials, it dates to around 125 million years ago. And there's incredible correspondence for molecular data to the fossil data. This is amazing that you can see this kind of correlation in a data set like this with pairs of animals, just comparing to the numbers of substitutions that we see in their molecular DNA compared to the fossil evidence that we see in the fossil record as well. Carnivores are the same thing. We have fossil evidence for carnivores that they evolved through transitional fossils, but with the molecular dating, we can find that there is this relationship as well. You have to ignore that, like when there is a group of animals, be it people or dogs or wolves or mustelids or raccoons, if there is an ancestor, that there is going to be divergence that occurs of the DNA sequence over time, and that ancestry is going to be totally inscribed in the DNA because there is a consistent mutation rate that occurs that gets passed from generation to generation. And the thing is, so about the fossils, like I didn't get time to talk about this, but I just because you wanted to, we want to cover a few things. The last few things are about there are literally scores and scores of different carnivore-like fossils, different species. They have different morphologies. Some of them are carnivore-like and some are not, like the Viveridae. They all date to the much older ancestry of within the 65 million years to around to the end of the Eocene. And only is when we see the carnivores through like the carnivoriformes. Eventually, we see the carnivores emerging around 40 million years ago to the point where there are the first true caniforms are identified in the fossil record at around 37 million years ago. That's the dog-like carnivores, but it doesn't look like any other caniform that's existence today. But it is a caniform, but it doesn't actually match any given species today. And the same goes for the feliforms. So the first feliforms we find are in the Miocene, around 30 million years ago. And right. So the thing is, like, there's strong evidence to show that the carnivores are all related to each other, and that this is true within kinds, if you want to call it that. I call them families. That's what we use for the Linnaean system. But also the different families, and the only way to explain that these different families are also related to each other is through common descent. And it is fantasy. Obviously, it's just a story in order to try to take all of these observations and try to cram it into 4,000 years of evolution. It doesn't match. It doesn't make any sense. It is complete fantasy. I'm going to leave it there.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris Thompson, for that concluding statement. And that would be exactly 4 minutes. And therefore, Kent, we will also give you equal time, 4 minutes for a concluding statement, starting now. Go ahead.
Okay, let's see. We descended from wolves. And our owner, where did he descend from? From a monkey. How embarrassing. Okay. I would agree that there are 339 breeds of dogs in the world, and they probably had a common ancestor called a dog. but there's limits to this variation. We have big dogs, little dogs. So far, 44-inch, I think, is the tallest, and 4-inch is the smallest dog. They're still dogs, not capable of interbreeding for mechanical reasons, but they certainly probably could be interbred for biological reasons. It's not evolution, it's a variation of the same kind. But you guys want to take evidence like this and say this is evidence that dogs and pine trees are related, because your charts have the dog and the pine tree connected, dog and a pine tree connected, and a sunflower and a frog. And this is not science, this is propaganda. It's artwork is all it is. So you mentioned quite a few things, Chris, I'd like to get in. You say you want to cram all these changes into 4,400 years. For heaven's sakes, you guys want to cram everything in the universe into a dot smaller than a period, and then cram all the life forms today into a single cell creature that evolved in the soup. You don't understand how dumb the religion of evolution is. It's so dumb. Panda bears have sharp teeth, look like canines, but they eat bamboo. I think there are quite a few animals that look like canine teeth, but they live on vegetation. The Bible says when God made the world, everything was vegetarian. After the flood, Genesis chapter 9, God said, Noah, now you can eat meat, and the animals are going to be afraid of you. I think meat eating in general happened after Noah's flood. So you said, again, you're stuck on the same thing I tried to explain to you before. You said, well, the feliforms formed in the Miocene. The Miocene is one of the areas of the geologic column that does not exist. There is no geologic column. How can the layers be different ages? There's no law of superposition. You can make up that phrase, and they do. Well, if it's on top, it must be younger. No, layers form sideways. I challenge all of you to watch the video. It's been out for 35 years now, I think. Experiments in stratification. Moving water sideways can make 10 layers at the same time, which means the layers are forming horizontally, not vertically. And you students that have been brainwashed by this stupid geologic column don't believe it. The layers form sideways. During Noah's flood, the tide going up and down is going to suck water in and out, forming thousands of layers in 1 year. So I think all the fossils we're finding, all of them, are the same age, 4,400 years. Okay? Let's see. Carnivores, he makes these statements. Well, we know carnivores came 40 million years ago and the feliforms formed 30 million years ago. You don't know any such thing. You're making this up, and you're impressing people with all these big numbers. And the students go, oh, wow, it got to be true. My professor said it. I pity the fact that you're a professor. Hope you're not teaching this in your professor in your class that you're teaching. Let's see. Neuroscience. I hope evolution doesn't get into neuroscience. You want people to understand neuroscience when they get graduated. So your whole argument is based on some very faulty assumptions that the layers of the earth are different ages, that there's a rate of mutations, that mutations can be helpful and harmful and helpful and add new information. That's simply not observable. What you've clearly demonstrated tonight is you believe in evolution. You have a religious belief, not a scientific statement at all. I think God said they'd bring forth after their kind. That's all anybody's ever seen in all of human history. No farmer in the world will tell you his cows produce anything other than cows. That's all we see. You simply don't, there's a lot of varieties, 450 breeds of cows probably came from a cow. But there's a limit. There are big cows and little cows. I forget the world's biggest cow. I think the fossil they found, they guessed, was 4,400 pounds, the world's largest cow, and the world's smallest cow, 33 inches tall, but they're still cows. You guys don't admit that there are limits to these variations and changes.
20 seconds.
You're never going to get a cow as big as a whale, but there are animals as big as a whale called a whale. You're never going to get a cow as small as a flea, even though there are animals as small as a flea, like a flea. So there are variations. Yes, there are variations, but they're within limits. God said they'll bring forth after their kind, after their kind, after their kind. God's right. He wins the debate. Thank you. Good night.
Okay, gentlemen, that concludes a really good, engaging debate. I would say that was a lot of fun. Time has flown by. A lot of people looking forward to this one. Again, we've had a good, solid mix in our live chat of both creationists and those that hold to evolution. So, okay, this is good. I think you both gave more than enough information to allow our audience to analyze the debate in an objective manner, hopefully. Okay, guys, let's get into some of our questions. And it does look like we have a pretty solid mix for the two of you. And so, all right, guys, let's have some fun. First question comes in from Creation Myths. And so this one is for you, Kent. Dr. Dan. He's coming at you. So let's see what he has for us here. Question for Kent. Why accept a common ancestor for wolves and dogs? So let's say domestic dogs, but not for dogs and cats. Same techniques, same predictions, same results. Why a different conclusion? Is it the Bible or something else?
We don't observe anything that could lead us to believe dogs and cats have a common ancestor. We observe dogs and wolves can mate today. The dogs and coyotes can mate. Coyotes and wolves can mate. The coy wolf. Those are probably the same kind. It's limited, according to the Bible, by can they bring forth. Now, I think it's possible for animals to diversify so far that they can no longer bring forth, like the Chihuahua and the Great Dane. But they're still obviously the same kind. Therefore, to take that evidence that dogs and wolves and coyotes had a common ancestor and conclude that dogs and cats have a common ancestor, that's where you go outside of science. You go to a religion. They go further than that. Not only do dogs and cats have a common ancestor, dogs and sunflowers have a common ancestor. That's way outside of science. So I would think it'd be scientific to say dogs and wolves had a common ancestor. I think we could probably demonstrate that. We cannot demonstrate that dogs and sunflowers have a common ancestor. That's a religious belief and nothing more. Nothing more.
Thank you very much, Kent. Chris, floor is yours.
Oh, I get to respond to that. All right. So, look, it's more than just whether they can interbreed that we can tell that animals share a common ancestor or not. If they can interbreed, that shows that they have a very recent common ancestor. But there are animals within just canids, the dogs, that cannot interbreed with each other. This is also true within the cats. Some cats can interbreed, but other cat forms cannot breed with other cat forms. This is even true within Felidae. There's 34 different species of Felidae, and they can't all interbreed. Yet creationists believe that they're all the same kind. So if we believe that there's universal common ancestry for the dog kind or the cat kind, we use, obviously there's going to be morphological and biogeographical and genetic evidence that will be consistent with the fact that they all have universal common ancestry. Why all of a sudden can't we do that for just dogs and cats as well? And it's just entirely arbitrary.
I appreciate that, Chris. Kent, the question was for you. Therefore, you get the last word. I should have said at the beginning. Yeah. So whoever the question's for, gentlemen, and we do have a pretty good mix, they'll get the last word. So Kent, go ahead.
Well, he said, why can't we do that for dogs and cats? Because they're outside of science. Science is what we can observe. You don't see it happening. You can't make it happen. You can't even make the dogs and cats produce an offspring that'll survive, even in the laboratory. So you can do whatever you want. Obviously, you can imagine anything you want. In your imagination, anything can take place. Man, Superman can fly if he puts his underwear on the outside of his pants. That's proof he can fly. That's imagination. That's all it is. That's all you have is a religious imagination that all these animals are related. And you're welcome to keep it, but it's not science.
Okay, thank you, Kent. Actually, glancing over the questions, most are for you, Kent. There are a few for you, Chris, but they're kind of off topic.
Oh,
so
okay.
Kent's more so in the hot seat, which means to the audience, as I'm putting forth these questions, if you do have a question specifically or challenge to Chris,
put me in the hot seat.
We don't want Kent having all the fun, you know.
Bring it on.
Let's keep it on Oder Carnivora. Send that in. And so, okay, here we go. Zachary, $10 super chat. Appreciate the support. It's for you, Kent. Dr. Kent, the science gent. Does the Bible predict DNA when it says all life was created by the word, assuming letters of the alphabet and DNA are both code?
Oh, the Bible doesn't mention DNA at all. Deoxyribonucleic acid, a lot of words. The Bible doesn't mention computers. The Bible doesn't mention airplanes. So I don't understand why that question means anything here. But the Bible says they'll always bring forth after their kind. Now that it says 20 times in the first 7 chapters. They bring forth, having to do with making babies. So I think that's probably an indication there's something in each creatures that allows them to only mate with their same kind. So I think it's pretty obvious from observation, from observable science, that that's all that happens. Cows produce cows, dogs produce dogs. These charts are propaganda posters that a frog and a butterfly and a dog are related. That's not science. Oh, and a bird, they're related too, and the octopus. And they all came from a protozoa. What they're trying to do, what Chris has done tonight, and what all the professors do on their students, they show them evidence of variation within what anybody would call the same kind, and then jump to the wild conclusion that we can all come from a protozoa. That's not science. That's all. It's a religion.
I didn't do that at all tonight. Sorry, bud. We talked about carnivores.
Yep. Even all the carnivores you can't prove had a common ancestor. You can prove their similarities, and there probably are. They had the same designer. Maybe they need the same thing to do the same to live in this world. Maybe they need sharp teeth to cut the meat. Good point. Maybe they need eyes. I know. But it's not proof of a common ancestor.
Morphologically, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the same genetic code. The Tasmanian devil, the Tasmanian tiger are more similar to a kangaroo than they are to a dog or a wolf.
Okay, gentlemen, appreciate it. This one's for you, Chris.
All right.
Genesis Girl. The better question may be, did the common ancestor have the genetic variability, so possibly design diversity, it was already there, to provide the current diversity, or is it due to mutations over time, Chris?
Common ancestry had genetic variability to provide the current diversity, or is it due to new mutations? Okay, so first of all, it's not Genesis Girl. I think that's Nice Girl, right? Because nice is a kind of geological form, right? So I like that. Nice Girl.
Yeah, okay, there we go.
Yeah, so I'm correcting you there. All right, and all right, so did common ancestor have genetic variability to provide the current diversity? No, that isn't okay. Well, it depends on which model you're talking about. So if you're talking about Kent's model, obviously not. If you're talking about a single male and a single female, there's not going to be enough heterozygosity within that single pairing of, say, the dog kind or the cat kind to allow for enough genetic diversity to be accounted for today. And it certainly is inconsistent with the mutation rate that we see today. So if you have just, a single pair, you're talking about a male and a female, they're going to have offspring. Those offspring are going to have to mate with their brothers and sisters. When we know that happens, that increases homozygosity that occurs within those populations. Inbreeding leads to homozygosity. This is one of the problems with the creationist model and the flood model, is that you only have two individuals, and that's going to lead to increase in homozygosity. Now, if you're talking about evolution, we're talking about whole populations of animals that slowly evolve over time. Of course, there's going to be variability that will be introduced, but there are new mutations that occur too. That's what I was getting at when I was talking about private alleles in the bush dog and the Maine wolf, that these must be mutations that are specific to just the bush dog or the Maine wolf, that those mutations seem to be involved in limb formation. And one slide I didn't get to, but if you want to read that paper, it's super interesting. They also talk about mutations in a whole metabolic pathway that allows the Maine wolf to process fibrous food from fruit, and that those mutations are not found in any other canid. They're only found in the Maine wolf.
Appreciate it, Chris. Kent, over to you if you had any thoughts.
Great question. I think it's the common ancestor have a genetic variability to provide the current diversity. I think the ancestor of all the dog kind of animals had the genetic code capable of producing a variety of offspring. As I've said, a human couple, man and wife, can produce 10 or 15 children that are all different, many times wildly different. Same couple producing them. So we see it in one generation. I think God designed the original creatures, let's take the original dog kind, so that it could produce offspring, that some could survive better in other climates than others. Some maybe can run faster. Some may have longer legs. My own children have one's taller than the other one, the two boys. Okay, so what? So yes, I think God designed the code to have variation. I think General Motors puts heaters and air conditioners in some of their cars, because some go to cold climate, some go to warm climate. Some of them even put windshield wipers on there, because some might go places where it rains. That's thinking ahead. That's a design feature. God designed all the animals to have a really amazing genetic code to begin with, and a code with variations that can be scrambled and mixed like shuffling a deck of cards. You can get a whole lot of differences. It's still the same code, still the same designer. So I don't think the diversity, maybe some of the diversity is due to some mutations, but I think the vast majority was already designed right from the beginning.
Thank you very much, Kent. Chris, you get the last word. Go ahead.
Great. Yeah, last word on that. It's impossible. It cannot work that way in your model. You have a single male and a single female that was brought onto the ark for these different kinds. And if you're talking about, say, the dog kind, leading to 34 different species with a huge range of variation that we talked about, right? The Maine wolf, the bush dog, the raccoon dog. Like, there are all kinds of different kinds of dogs and wolves and foxes. Huge variation, but you cannot have all that genetic diversity in just a single male and a single female. they have to have arisen by mutation. That's the only way to explain it. And you know, we have the novelty that's evolved as well, right? We've got the web footing of the bush dog and these long legs of the Maine wolf, and different, you know, canids have different other specializations that's occurred. This is within kind. So there's obviously the evolution of novelty. That means that there must be genetic mutations that can result in new structure and new function, and then be selected for through natural selection. Okay.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Next one comes in from Rue Boot. Question for the young earth creationist. That would be you, Kent. Here is the question. How did rapid speciation occur post-flood with each kind naturally? The questioner is wondering, was it a miracle? Oh, Kent, just one sec. If you could backtrack me 10 seconds.
Okay. I'll answer the last part first. I don't believe it was a miracle. I think it can all be explained by genetic diversity in the original code. And I think Chris is very wrong that it can't happen in one generation. One human couple could have theoretically 50 kids, and they could all be very different, very different. So I think we see there is already genetic diversity in one man and one woman producing different children. One man, one woman can have a blonde child, a brunette child, and a redhead child if it's in the gene code. So I think the genetic code is mind-boggling in its complexity, and I think God ought to get the glory for what he made, not Charlie Darwin or a rock or anything else. So I think God ought to get the glory. He made the genetic code so fantastic that it can produce a variety. It'd be terrible if we were all clones, all identical to each other. It'd be awful, in my humble opinion. I like the diversity of humans, and animals too.
And you clearly just don't understand biology, basic biology. Offspring of two parents, whether you have 2 or 50, they're all going to be much more similar to those parents and to each other than to any other family on the block. That's just how.
That's not what I said. I said they're not identical.
But you're not getting like new varieties within those kids. That just isn't how that works.
Well, let's take. Do you have any brothers or sisters?
I do. I got 2 brothers.
Are you identical?
Watching, I hope.
Are you identical to them?
I'm not identical, but I certainly look a lot like him than I do like any other person on the planet.
Are you the same height? Do you have the same hair color? Do you have the same eyes?
Yeah, we have very similar hair color. Yes. We both have blue eyes. Like, there's a lot of things that we know are obviously genetically prescripted that must be because we have similar genetic code, because we have the same parents.
But you're not identical. You are different.
No, we're not identical, because obviously there's ressortment and there's some variation of some genes that I get from one parent versus another parent.
Can
not be identical.
Right.
Even identical twins are truly identical.
Right. I agree.
Right, because there's epigenetic changes, and there's obviously development and environment influences the overall morphology.
So one mother and one father can produce a redhead or a blonde or a brunette. They can produce a child with brown eyes or blue eyes or no eyes, blind. They're the same
red-headed
couple.
parents are not going to be producing a brown-headed kid. That just isn't how.
A redheaded may be dominant. I understand. Okay, but one human.
You don't understand this topic.
You don't understand a whole lot of stuff.
Well, redhead is recessive. Okay.
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
My dad was a redhead, but I'm not blonde. Okay. So one couple can't. I'll stick by my guns. One human couple can produce a lot of children. None of them are identical, and many of them might have some really wild variations. One can be much taller than his brother. Same couple, they get them the same way, they feed them the same food, and they turn out different. So you can believe what you want. But the question was, I don't think we need rapid speciation. I think after the flood, the animals, they're still diversifying. And we're the ones deciding to call it a new species, not the animals. We've decided there's X number of species of dogs. Just let them loose. If they can mate with each other, they're the same kind. The Bible doesn't use the word species. It says they're the same kind, which sometimes is the species. What's a species? It's a type or a kind. So the words are used interchangeably in modern scientific literature. There are 26 published definitions of species. Nobody knows what a species is for sure. A group that can reproduce. A species is difficult to define. So yeah, I think they can produce the same. They'll always produce the same kind, just like the Bible says. Oh, wrong chart. I don't think there's any evidence anywhere on the planet to refute what God said they'll bring forth after their kind. You can imagine that they got a different ancestor All he's given tonight is his SpongeBob imagination. If we go back in time, this one's related to this one. You don't know any such thing. You believe it? Congratulations. It's not science. You need to take some biology classes and learn some real biology.
Kent, thank you very much. Appreciate the banter. Gentlemen, keeping this fun, engaging. So we got one for you now, Chris. That one was for Kent. Cool Jesus. He's got a question again for you, Chris. What species, genus, or family in Carnivora is most difficult to explain in Kent's model? Example, hyenas, otters, civets.
Yes. So thanks for the question, Cool Jesus. Great name. I'm hoping I'm interpreting this question correctly. So yes, there are groups of carnivores that are very difficult to explain in Kent's model. Like they don't actually work in Kent's model. I think that's what this question is asking. Hyenas provide one of the greatest examples of that because hyenas are within the feliforms. They have feliform type morphology for those specific features that we know are feliforms. For instance, they have a dual chambered auditory bullae. They have certain carnassial teeth, right? But they are very dog-like in their overall morphology. Now, what we know about the evolution of the hyenas actually is quite extensive because we have an extensive fossil record of the hyenas. They go back millions of years, back to tens of millions of years. And we know that they evolved in the steppes of Asia, where it was much cooler climate. And what we see is that basically hyenas are a form of convergent evolution, where they're largely feliform originally, but they evolved, and we know there are transitional forms as well in the fossil record, into a dog-like ancestor that now we call hyenas, where they actually now adopt the lifestyle and hunting style of the other dog-like carnivores, and not so much like the feliform-like carnivores. Feliforms tend to be very solitary, and they tend to hunt by surprise, and they just chase down their prey and capture them real quickly. Whereas hyenas tend to do more of the dog-like things where they hunt in packs, and they will try to exhaust their prey by following them. That means that also that interestingly, there's convergent evolution of their overall morphology, that they don't have retractable claws, that they have teeth that's actually more canid-like than felid-like, even though some of it is also felid-like. But the thing is, the genetics shows that they're not more dog-like. Their genes are not more dog-like. Their genes are more similar to lions and the civets and the other feliforms than they are to any dog. Like they're much more similar in their overall genetic code to a lion or a civet or a mongoose than they are to any of the caniforms, the bears or the dogs or the otters, for instance.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate the response. Kent, over to you.
He says the hyena is more cat-like, has the two chambers in the ear instead of the one. You don't have any way to prove that they're related to anything different than a hyena. All we've ever seen is hyenas produce baby hyenas every time. So what you just shared was an imagination bedtime story that maybe 30 million years ago this happened. You cannot possibly know that. You can believe that all you want. So you said we know hyenas came 10 million years ago in Asia. That has to be based on one observation of finding a fossil of a hyena in a rock layer that some idiot dated at 10 million years ago. All the layers formed in one big flood. There is no geologic column, Chris. I know this is your Bible, and this is the way you think. You've been duped. You've been lied to.
Sorry, there are dozens of examples of
Watch experiment. I didn't interrupt you. Watch experiments in stratification. You'll see the layers form sideways, many layers simultaneously. I can make 10 layers at a time with a moving sideways. There is no geologic column. And so the hyenas were dated, that you said 10 million years ago in Asia, because they're found in a rock layer that somebody else dated at that age. I'm sorry, it's just SpongeBob imagination, the whole thing. I stand by my guns. Evolution is the dumbest and most dangerous religion in the history of mankind.
Thank you, Kent. Appreciate it. Chris, you get the last word. Question was for you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the imagination is entirely on the creationist side. They want to discount anything that disagrees with their model. And they've created this fantasy story that's based on their interpretation of the Bible. But, I'll talk about biblical literalism. In fact, like Kent obviously isn't a biblical literalist because he doesn't believe in the firmament. He doesn't believe that there is a flat earth, that there are the ends of the earth. He thinks that that is metaphor, right? You don't take that literally, but somehow you're also going to take these other things literally. And that's because he knows that is just stupid to believe in a flat earth. Hopefully he'll learn enough that there's enough room for allegory in the Bible that you can take the other things in the Bible and just say that that's true, that you can believe that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, all that stuff. You don't have to believe this fantasy stuff about Noah taking dogs on the ark and raccoons on the ark, the ancestors of these things, and that we have 34 new species of dogs in just 4,000 years. And actually a lot less than that, because we know that these dog species are present in the archaeological record. Humans talk about these different dog species or bear species much earlier than what could possibly be accounted for in the molecular data. And so it's just impossible for all of that to evolve.
Chris, thank you very much. As I bring up the next question, I think your mic might have moved a little bit away from you because you're kind of coming in and up. Yeah, that should be better.
Okay.
We heard most of what you said, but a little bit of
gotcha
out there. Oh, that sounds good. Okay, Kent, next one's for you. JM21, $5 super chat. Appreciate the support. Kent should give humans more credit in our ability to name animals. After all, that was the one job Adam was given in his own pre-fall worldview. Kent, what are your thoughts?
I don't know if that's a question, but yeah, you can name animals anything you want. They don't care what we're naming them. That's my point. Careless lineage classification system is very useful. I'm in favor of it. Organizing my tools in my shop is very useful. And I like to know where the shovels are, where the hammers are, where the screwdrivers are. That's a useful thing. But that doesn't prove any common ancestry. This is where they go stark raving stupid on believing because we classified them close together, therefore they're related. It's just simply not science. We know cows produce cows. That we observe. We know dogs produce dogs. We know that. We see it. It happens. We do not know that dogs and cows have a common ancestor, or dogs and lions, even though they're both carnivores, okay? We don't know that they have a common ancestor. You can believe that if you'd like. You can believe anything you'd like. But I think the debate tonight is very clear. What Chris has done is shared his religious worldview. He believes the variations we see within these same kind of animals is evidence that they're all related, and it's just simply nonsense. I saw you swallowed that in college.
Thank you, Kent. Chris, anything you want to add?
Yep. So it's obvious that the entire creationist enterprise is intellectually bankrupt. They have no ability to actually decide like what actually is a kind. You've seen that with Kent happen over and over again. Like he doesn't want to talk about a dog kind. He wants to talk about 6 different dog kinds. Can't actually define a kind, despite the fact that kind is mentioned 7 times or 20 times in the first 7 chapters of the Bible. He can't actually say what are kinds. And that's just an illustration of just how intellectually bankrupt this whole thing is.
Okay, I get to go last?
Yep.
Let's see. There are 26 published definitions of the word species. Chris, you have no idea what a species is. Nobody has an idea what a species is. There are lots of different definitions of species. What's a species? Scientific American. The debate over species definition is far from over. We don't know. But you use that word flippantly, but yet they don't know what it is. The Bible says they can bring forth after their kind. That's good enough. I would agree there are lines that are kind of blurry sometimes, but nobody knows what a species is. The lines are blurry. So, but you want to classify it as a species. So if man has made 228 species of squirrels, let's say, the squirrels don't care how we classify them. God, I don't know how many animals Noah took on the ark. I'll find out when I get to heaven. I really believe the story is literally true and scientifically accurate. You believe all the animals not only fit in an ark, they fit in a dot of nothing exploding. This is what the evolution religion teaches. I think it's stupid. You can believe it all you want, but it's simply not science. All the matter in the universe came from a dot smaller than a period on a page. That's what you believe. I know you don't want to talk about that tonight because it's embarrassingly stupid. And congratulations, you avoided it. You only
getting out of the
carnivore.
Debate, that's all.
Huh?
You're just getting out of the topic of the debate. That's all. Like,
okay, intellectually bankrupt is the evolutionist.
Right, because I wanted to keep it restricted to carnivores because it's an illustration of just how intellectually bankrupt your entire enterprise is. That you want to talk about SpongeBob and imagination and everything was in a dot and all this stuff. You want to use this, this basic script that you always run over and over again.
Because it's true.
When you're forced to deal with specifics, you have no answer to any of it. None of it fits your model. Zero.
Chris, you're claiming that cats and dogs have a common ancestor because they both eat meat and they both have some similarities in their body structure. And they have
the genetics and the biogeography and the fossil evidence. There's a lot of things that show that cats and dogs share a common ancestor.
Okay, there is no such thing as a fossil record. All you know is when you find a fossil, all you know is it died. You can't prove it had children that were different. You have to imagine that it had children that were different.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, honestly. And I'm sorry to be so pedantic, but honestly, that is so stupid. Like, you always say that about, like, oh, if you find a fossil, how do you know that it had a baby? That doesn't matter. Like, we can talk about it obviously came from a population of animals. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a fossil. And
how do you know that? You're avoiding Your Honor, he's avoiding the question. Okay. How do you know that one had babies?
What difference does it make? It's from a population of similar animals. That's the thing.
You're making a claim that you don't have any idea. How do you know anyone?
You're right.
If you find 10,000
the one
fossils.
hyenodon that we find in a particular site in the steppes of Asia was the only one that existed, and it just happened to be like plopped into existence, and there was no parent or offspring of the entire population.
Okay, Chris, I'll give you 10,000.
It's utterly absurd. If I find a cat skeleton out in the woods, am I going to say, like, oh, well, how do I even know cats even had birth to other cats? Like, I know there are populations of cats. If I see the skeleton of a cat, it's obviously part of a species, and that there are going to be more examples of it.
Well, you don't know. You can't prove that either. But if I'll give you 10,000 hyena skeletons. Sure. You find 10,000 hyena skeletons in the dirt. You don't know that any of those had children. That you certainly don't know they had children that were different. What we see today, hyenas have baby hyenas. Now, if you wish to imagine, they came from something else.
You can go to a cemetery and you can dig up thousands of human skeletons. How do you know any of them had babies?
You don't. You know they died.
Right.
You can't prove from a skeleton it had any babies.
That's why this is so stupid.
I agree. The whole evolution thing is stupid. I'm glad you agree with me on that.
Let's go on to the next question.
All right, Donny, it's late. I'm tired, getting old. Can we quit?
Okay, let's do one more just because it's a super chat. Gentlemen, this is going to be a hard debate to top in 2025. The banter, the engagement, it's been fun. You guys are going blow for blow, shot for shot. Okay, and you're both good sports. You can take it, right? You guys got thick skin.
No hard feelings on either side.
A digital handshake at the end of it all. Yeah. So, okay, well, it's a super chat. I'm not sure how on topic it is, but we'll just do a power round. I've actually got 2 super chats left. Let's do a real quick power round. We'll call it a night. I appreciate in light how busy you both are. I appreciate the couple hours you've given to us tonight. Zachary, $10 super chat. Appreciate the support. I think it's directed at you, Chris. And so he says, if DNA has both physical, CATG, and metaphysical, information/instruction, then can you demonstrate nature has ever been observed? Writing instructions de novo. No, mutations is not de novo. I guess we could relate this to the argument from earlier that you guys touched on a little bit, whether or not the diversity is largely created diversity or mainly due to mutation.
Right. And I still don't understand how even you can get created diversity within a single male and a single female. That's going to result in the vast genetic diversity that you see within each carnivore family, in the dogs and the hyenas and the cats. Like, you just can't. There's not enough genetic diversity that you can explain for then the vast array of the morphological features that you see. And you certainly can't explain it in a 4,000-year timeline. But we do know that there are certain genetic mutations that have resulted in huge significant changes. For instance, there's a paper that's published in 2022 in Science, I think. Yeah, this is in Science. So this is it's entitled, and actually I can even share it real briefly if we have time for that. 1 second here. Should have gotten that prepared. Sorry. Okay. So in this paper, this is a human TKTL1 gene implies greater neurogenesis in the frontal neocortex in modern humans than in Neanderthals. But basically what they did in this study is that they went and they looked at the human genome, the chimpanzee genome, and the Neanderthal genome, because we have the full Neanderthal genome sequence. Now, Kent and other creationists believe that humans and Neanderthals share a common ancestor, as do I, right? They disagree that obviously the chimpanzees and humans share a common ancestor. Now, the thing is, obviously, Neanderthals and humans are more genetically similar to each other than either are to chimpanzees. We can all agree on that because we can just look at the actual sequence data. But the TKTL1 gene, when you compare the human genome to the pan troglodytes genome, we find that there's really only a single amino acid substitution, and that's this. In humans, it's arginine right here. In chimps, it's lysine. And the thing is that's really interesting about this is that, well, I should actually go back. The Neanderthal genome actually has the chimp version. So this group went ahead and tried to find what are human Homo sapiens specific mutations that have resulted in amino acid changes that are we find just in Homo sapiens, but not in Neanderthals and not in chimpanzees. And this is one of those mutations. There aren't so many of them, but there are some. That would mean that there would have to have been a mutation after the split between Neanderthals and humans. And what we find is that this mutation actually results in major changes in the number of neuroprogenitor cells that we see. That if we change the genetic code of certain cells within a dish, we can grow them up, and we can find that they actually are more neuroprogenitor cells with the human version than the ape version or the Neanderthal version. It's the same thing. We can actually make genetic changes in the animals as well to cause certain changes. And what they've done is they genetically modified a ferret. The ferret actually has the chimpanzee and Neanderthal version and not the human version. And they put the human version in the ferret. And what they find is that there are major changes in the overall neocortex of ferrets and mice that actually expanding the overall neocortex. And that's because humans and Neanderthals generally have a difference in their overall size of the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is larger in Homo sapiens than it is in Homo neanderthalensis. And what this means is that this creates this model is that the single mutation has resulted in the fact that we can have an expansion of the overall prefrontal cortex. And this, they show the specific model by which this occurs is an expansion of the neuroprogenitor cells that give rise to new neurons. So yeah, Kent, neuroscience, evolution, it actually does intersect in super interesting ways. And this is one of those studies.
Thank you, Chris. Kent, anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, I think that's way off topic from the question that was asked. If DNA has both physical, it does, and metaphysical information, then can you demonstrate nature having ever observed writing instructions? I would point out that you pick any book, or take a Bible, for instance, okay? It is a bunch of lines, ink printed on a piece of paper. But it's more than that. It's not just ink on paper. It's carrying information. It's carrying a code. The DNA is not just CATG molecule. It is carrying a code, a phenomenal code. So we know the physical part of the DNA, how it's made up, the CATG model. Okay, that's no question. We know a lot about that. But that doesn't explain the fact that it's not just molecules hooked together. It's carrying information. Morse code is not just dots and dashes. It's carrying an information. This computer is not just a bunch of dots on the screen. I mean, physically it is, but there's information carried. This is where Chris is not getting it at all, okay? It's more than just the physical part. There is information involved. Man is more than just a physical body. There's something different about man than just a physical body. If a person dies, you can weigh them a microsecond after they're dead, and they weigh the same amount when they were alive. So what's changed? What is the difference between a dead mouse and a live mouse? What exactly is life? I think that's what they're getting at in Zachary's question. There is a physical part to the DNA. I agree. Really complex. There's a physical part to putting ink on a piece of paper. But there's also the mind behind it that makes those ink in a certain order that carries information. I think it had to be designed. There's no other option. I don't think mutations are going to cause that.
Thank you, Kent. Chris, you get the last word.
So, like, DNA is not just a set of instructions. It's just a code of nucleotide sequences that fumbles and changes over time. We know that that's the case. We can observe that. These mutations do result in some changes sometimes. Most of the time, it's entirely neutral and has no effect. Sometimes it can be deleterious, but those individuals that have that mutation, that get that mutation, may not even be born and certainly won't survive if it's deleterious enough. But occasionally, a mutation can arise in this set of instructions that will result in some significant change that can confer an advantage to those groups of individuals that inherit that mutation. And now it's now been a substitution, and they will outcompete their other, fellow species members, and benefit and survive and reproduce. And therefore that mutation will make its way into the population, and there will be change that occurs over time. I just showed one example of this, the CKTL1 gene, where a single amino acid substitution results in these major changes of the overall brain structure. And that's a clear indication that you don't need a whole lot of change to occur to allow for substantial overall morphological change.
Okay, gentlemen, that wraps up an excellent Q&A. I always look forward to these audience Q&As as it gives us the opportunity to expand on the debate, expand on many of the points discussed in the debate that we just didn't have that much time to elaborate on. So, gentlemen, appreciate your time. It's been a debate to remember, that's for sure, on the Oder Carnivora. We've had a fantastic live chat the whole time. And again, we've had a good, solid diversity of views in our live chat. So let's get some real quick final words, final thoughts. Again, I really appreciate you guys giving us your time on a Saturday night showdown. Chris, let's start with you. Thanks for doing this. Hope you had fun. Let's get some final words from you.
Sure. Yeah, I just appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk a little bit about this topic that I obviously care a lot about. I think that it's, despite the fact that obviously my colleagues think that it's a waste of time to talk to creationists, most of you guys are really nice. I like talking to you, and I think that it's fun. I enjoy doing these kinds of debates. I also end up learning a lot. I knew basically nothing about carnivores before I decided to pick this topic, so I appreciate the opportunity to pick something that's kind of unique and interesting, and I think illustrates an awful lot for my side. Unfortunately, I don't think that it actually helps Kent very much at all. But hey, look, I finally get the opportunity to go face to face with Kent. Obviously, just about every evolutionary debater on the internet feels like they need to do that. So I've got my notch on my belt. So, and I appreciate Donny giving me the opportunity to do it.
You checked it off your bucket list. I appreciate you being willing to hang out with us and being willing to be seen with me in public. So very nice of you, Chris.
I'm honored.
There we go. It's been a great debate. Appreciate it. And that's what these are about, learning things, growing in knowledge on all these topics. Kent, appreciate your time as well. Thank you as always. Hope you had as much fun as I did. Let's hand it to you. Final words, final thoughts.
Well, thank you. And Chris, you're welcome to come visit our dinosaur adventure land in Lenox, Alabama anytime. We have a science center that teaches real science, how God created the world. It's amazing. Everything about this creation is amazing, from the air we breathe to the stars we see up there. And I wish you could just give God the glory for his creation instead of, coming from a rock. I think if you take Pascal's wager, you're going to really be in trouble. If I'm right and you're wrong, you're in trouble eternally. If you're right and I'm wrong and we're nothing but animated mud, I haven't lost a thing. I have a wonderful life. God's been good. I've enjoyed life, even if I'm deluded. I've enjoyed life, just like believing in God's creation. So I would encourage you to really stop and think about, what if you're wrong? Maybe you lose your job and lose your paycheck if you admit that, but I don't know. Okay? All right.
Okay,
Thank
Kent.
you, brother.
Chris, Kent, thank you for your time. Thanks for an excellent, memorable debate. We're going to let you guys get out of here for the night and get some rest. Chris, Kent, and okay, that was an excellent debate. Again, I've been looking forward to this one for a while since we scheduled it, and Chris and Kent did not let us down. Now, what I want to do, though, just real quick, and then we're going to wrap things up for tonight, as it is the weekend. This was a Saturday night showdown on the evolution of carnivores, the Oder Carnivora. I do want to highlight a couple of the creation versus evolution shows that we have coming up for everybody. And we will be back here on Monday for a debate on the age of the earth from the scriptures. And so this will be a debate between Ben Kissling and Adam Terry from Curious Christianity. They're going to be debating the question, is the Bible agnostic about the age of the earth? I'm excited for this one. Should be good. And then next Saturday, we got another Saturday night debate showdown on ancestry, evolution, and origins. This time we've got Dr. Jerry Bergman and Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal, aka Creation Myths, who's been in our live chat here tonight. And I'm pumped for this one. I think this is going to be an excellent debate. Both Jerry and Dan know their stuff on this topic, the topic being common descent or common design. And so I'm sure we are going to be getting a technical, comprehensive, thought-provoking, and engaging debate next Saturday. So make sure to hit that notification bell on that debate. You definitely don't want to miss this one. And you want to make sure you're here live in order that you can send in your questions, your challenges, and your objections for both Dan and also Jerry. Okay, guys, with that, we're going to wrap things up. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the feedback, the support. For those who sent in a question via Super Chat or just a comment via Super Chat and we didn't get the opportunity to engage it, consider yourself getting an IOU. And so we host roughly 4 to 5 events a week. Utilize that IOU, especially in our upcoming debates, the Age of the Earth on Monday, and then Common Descent versus Common Design next Saturday between Jerry and Dan. Okay, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Again, I think this was a lot of fun, a very entertaining debate, a great way to spend a Saturday night engaging the evolution of carnivores. Okay, guys, Standing for Truth is out. God bless you all.